Oh, come on, Zach. Hey, everybody. How's everybody doing tonight?
Hey guys.
We'll do an introduction first, and then we'll put the slides up there. It's great seeing everybody, seeing however many, I can't do math. My name is Sean Jacobson. I'm a teacher up here in New York City. And I've taught Comp Gov for 10, 12 years. I don't even know anymore. Okay, it's getting, yeah. All right, so I got Zach next. Is that right?
Yeah, hey everybody. My name is Zach. I don't know if you guys heard really Zach right before we started streaming, right at the very start. That's because someone coughed right before we start. I want to point out that wasn't me. It was David. So wanted to point that out to everybody really quick before we started. I'm a sophomore at the Math and Science Academy in Woodbury, Minnesota, which is basically just St. Paul. And because Sean always makes us answer this, I did get a 5 when I took the exam. I self-studied it last year. And yeah, handing it over to David.
Hi guys. I'm David. I'm from Miami, Florida. I'm a senior. I attend Terra Environmental here in Miami, Florida. I self-studied comparative government last year, and I also received a 5. I'm so happy to be here with you guys today. Bella, you're beneath me, so.
Okay. Hi everyone. My name is Isabella, but y'all can call me Bella. I'm actually originally from Brazil, but I'm currently a senior at the University of Denver studying political science and economics. Very happy to be here. I took this exam 5 years ago and I did get a 5. So it's our lucky number today. Whoever wants to go next.
I'll go. So hi, I'm Anjani Sharma. I'm from Gainesville, Florida. And I took this exam last year. I also got a 5, so you're in very well company. And I love this course, top 2 AP courses ever. So it's gonna be a lot of fun tonight. And Nishka, your last.
Wait, what's number one?
Curiosity, what's the other one? Like, who says top 2?
Oh, I like US Gov. I love US Gov. US Gov has such
on.
US Gov is so fun, and
I mean, if
sometimes
you
it's
said
hard.
AP.
Remember,
But not as fun as comparative government,
yeah,
to be
comparative
clear.
100%. But remember, you cannot compare the AP five and with the US. So remember that. No comparing United States with any of our Comp Gov countries.
Hi, my name is Nishka. I'm a senior and I'm from Cincinnati, Ohio. I call this class Kogo, and everyone yells at me for it. So if you support me, I've been saying this every night. Please let me know in the chat because I'm right. I took this class last year as a 1-semester course, and then I did also get a 5 on the AP exam. So yeah, excited to be here with you all.
Okay, I'm gonna add the poll again. We've been asking this every single night. So what do you call the course? AP Comp, AP Kogo? If it's something else, please put it in the chat.
All right.
And then also, we want to ask, were you guys here for the preview nights? How many of you? So that poll is also available. You guys should be able to see both polls.
Now it is.
So yeah.
Awesome.
And then I'm gonna share my screen. Right? Am I sharing the screen? Okay.
Yeah.
Screen. Which screen am I sharing? That one. Boom. And
All right,
Mishka,
of
just
course,
like
it's AP Comp Gov came up on top because it's AP Comp Gov.
I don't see a single person voting for AP Kogo.
And I
Just
think
saying.
that's
telling.
Yeah, very much so.
Yeah.
I support
Okay,
whoever
so
that.
people weren't here for the preview nights, but it's okay
That's good.
because we'll catch you.
They don't know our humor
yet. All right. So, welcome guys to our Fiveable 2024 Crams for your AP exam season. If this is your only exam, we want to wish you the best of luck. And of course, if it's not your only exam, best of luck on all of your exams. You guys are going to do amazing. So, if we could see the next slide, please. All right, so for today, we'll go over the overall organization of Cram sessions, but here's the quick agenda for today. So, our welcome, which we're doing now. Then we're gonna review a little bit of.
No, this isn't right.
Yeah, I
I'm gonna
don't
change
think
the
that's
slide.
right. Yeah,
We're gonna do Unit 1,
Right.
right? I'll go. You know what it is, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Then
Yeah, well, we're gonna
yeah.
review Unit 1, then we might take a couple of breaks. Then we'll continue through that, and then we'll take a quiz at the end. So, yeah. If and so here are some of the Fiveable community agreements. We won't go over them every night, but we want you to be familiar with these as you continue with your cram sessions. So number one is, of course, to be supportive and lift each other up. That is extremely important, especially through these really, really stressful times. Um, so yeah, just remember to be supportive of your questions, be supportive of what other people ask. Um, then it's to be patient. We have 5 nights together, and that's a long time. 5 nights, 3 hours each night. It may seem like a little bit of time, though it's definitely not. So be patient with each other. Be patient with the questions other people ask, and the responses that you may get. They may not be exactly what you want, but of course, ask for the clarification. And then lastly is to be kind. We're all people behind a screen, and so you need to make sure to act as if you were in real life, treat people the way you want to be treated. So I guess just to keep these 3 pillars in mind in the community agreements. And a reminder that if anything negative or offensive does happen in the chat, we have permission to ban anybody who does anything inappropriate. So please keep that in mind as we continue with our time. Next slide, please. All right, so here's our overall cram schedule for our cram nights. So today we're going to be going over Unit 1, May 3rd. So the cram sessions each night will vary between 7 and 10 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. And then they will continue all the way up until May 7th, which, if I'm not mistaken, is Tuesday, May 7th. So May 3rd, May 4th, May 5th, May 6th, May 7th, well, we will all cover different topics and areas of the comparative government course. I believe they follow just to the course and exam description, Unit 1, Unit 2, Unit 3, Unit 4, all with little pockets of Unit 5. And then Night 5, it will be like an overall review of everything where we acknowledge your questions and see what you guys want us to do. So today, we're going to be reviewing Unit 1, between 7 and 10 p.m. Here's just again our hosts. Get familiar with them. You'll be with us for a while. So yeah, next slide, please. All right, how to make the most of your cram finale. So if you're here, you obviously signed up for the cram package with Fiveable, and great decision, great investment. We will be taking, so it's important to make the best out of these cram finales, and this applies for all your courses as well, is to keep notes. Write down, you don't have to write down everything, of course. This is recorded and you will be able to come back to take notes of whatever you miss, any gaps in your knowledge. But if you come up with something while we're reading, while we're going over certain topics, don't be afraid to write them down to find them to find certain things that will help you remember the topics. So like mnemonics or questions or even a to-do list. You could even put it in the chat. We're lucky enough that comparative government is a small course, so anything that helps you remember certain topics will be extremely useful to other people. And yeah, and then we want to also direct you to the My Stuff section of the Fiveable cram session. I'm gonna create a call to action here where you're able to find the slides to these these finales, and also cheat sheets to certain parts of the course where you're able to review and go along even like on the go. So I think that's extremely important and also an essential part of your cram package. Lastly, use a group chat. Don't be afraid to communicate with the people in here, to create a group chat on how you can share tips and tricks and participate when we ask questions. So yeah, so don't be afraid. Don't tread lightly. It's gonna be extremely fun, especially if you guys make it so. And then a Q&A tab. So right below the chat feature is a Q&A tab. The way you grow in your knowledge of a subject and you grow in your knowledge of a certain topic is by answering questions and asking questions. So don't be afraid to ask questions that pertain in that Q&A tab that pertain to what we're reviewing or pertain to the course as a whole. We have 4 hosts here, or 4 other hosts and our teacher that would be more than happy to answer questions that you need answered. So please, we'd love to see you use that tab, or you can even ask questions in the chat. We will be here and we will love to answer. Next slide, please. Oh, and actually, no, please not next slide. We will be taking breaks, and the replay will be available. And actually, is it okay if I put up the poll about the breaks? We want to take a...
I just did it.
Yeah, we want to ask whether you guys want one 15-minute break or 2 10-minute breaks within our 3-hour session. We understand that a 3-hour session may be a bit strenuous. So how you guys may want it done, we really want your input on that. Seems like the people here are preferring the 10-minute breaks. So I guess we'll go with that for now. And then if anything changes, please let us know. The chat is here and open to all of you. All right, so let's get started, I think. Next slide, please. Oh, and be sure to follow Fiveable on all social media. Actually, before all of this starts, I want to direct you guys to the Crowdcast features. I guess that wasn't a part of the slideshow. But as I mentioned before, right below the chat tab is going to be your Q&A feature where you guys are able to ask questions pertaining to the slides or pertaining to the course in general. We would be more than happy to answer them. That's what we're here for, to cover any holes to fill in any holes of your knowledge. So please don't be afraid to answer those. Right below the Q&A tab is going to be the poll tab, where all the polls that we ask, we would love for you guys to answer and interact with us. It's going to be polls pertaining to, they're going to be icebreaker polls, they're going to be course related polls, they're going to be everything. So that'll definitely be something to look at. All right, just get familiar with that. All right, next slide. Oh, okay. So today we're going to be reviewing Unit 1, a good amount of Unit 1 of the AP Comparative Government course. So Unit 1 covers political systems, regimes, and government, and is around 18% to 27% of the exam. Next slide, please. So what is political science and comparative government? I bet you covered this at the beginning of the year. Next slide, please. But it's super important to understand this when you're actually taking an exam that pertains to the course. So comparative government is a field in political science which uses quantitative and qualitative analysis to study and compare different political systems, whether they're old or they're new. We want to compare political systems and find how viable they are for certain people or for certain leaders. So I think that's why comparative politics tends to be one of the most important fields of political science. So comparative government has 2 essential parts to it: quantitative and qualitative analysis. So quantitative analysis uses objective measurement. It uses numbers. It's measurable data like surveys or indexes that help us compare other countries to each other. It's like when you see maps with different indexes, that's all quantitative comparative government. So things such as the Gini index, the HDI or the Human Development Indexes, or GDP comparisons, gross domestic product, or GDP per capita, those are all used in comparative government. So we can compare the countries, compare different governmental systems. Then we have qualitative analysis. Qualitative analysis uses subjective judgment, things that are not necessarily based with numbers. So based on non-quantifiable data such as interviews or case studies. So when you look at certain government types or the religion that covers a certain government, those are all extremely important in the qualitative side of comparative government. And I think that's what makes comparative government and political science so cool. You're able to gather these 2 essential parts of the social sciences and normal science and put them together to make something that is extremely useful in the real world. So next slide, please. So how do case studies fit in? Excuse me. So AP Comparative Government looks at 6 countries, when you're looking at your case studies. So the 6 countries are China, or the Democratic People's Republic of China, Iran, Mexico, Nigeria, Russia, and the United Kingdom. So case studies are in-depth, detailed examinations of a particular case or cases within real-world context. They play a critical role in the study of comparative politics. It's the essence of comparative politics, by helping you identify, analyze, and explain the similarities and differences across political systems. So the case studies help us apply the concepts to real life. Without case studies, then the whole study of politics and looking at these different quantitative and qualitative aspects of politics truly make no sense, because then they have no real world application. So I guess, as I mentioned before, if you don't have a country to compare to, if you don't have like a different governmental system to compare to, there is no point in this study, because you're not helping or doing anything with it. So that's why case studies are so essential. And the College Board chose these 6 countries because they're so vastly different in their governmental systems, as well as they're easily divided between democratic and authoritarian regimes, which we'll go into after. But the case studies of the hundreds of countries around the world are extremely important for all of comparative politics. And if you choose to pursue this as a career, you'll be comparing every country, essentially. Next slide, please. All right. So the critical approaches in comparative politics and how we analyze our case studies. So there's two approaches that we use for comparative government, and these are not necessarily really tested on the exam, but they're important to know on how you look at your case studies and how you approach your view of them. So the first one is behavioralism, which is an objective and quantified approach that looks at individuals rather than the institutions. So I guess the little meme on the right side of my slides help explain this. So behavioralism helps generalize and objectify politics by looking at patterns through these world leaders, and patterns of different governments and how they've changed. Often this is what's really taken as the approach in comparative politics, but the next theory we're going to look at is looked with both. So the other approach we have is rational choice theory, which assumes individuals act out of self-interest, which helps us understand economic, social, and political behavior. So this one is a little bit darker on the side of comparative politics, but it helps look at politics as a power game, which is essentially what it is. The word politics is derived from power. So how people act in their self-interests, whether it's economic, socially, or for just general power, is extremely important when understanding these two approaches. So really, they're both mixed in when you're understanding your case studies, but it's important to make that distinction, not necessarily for the exam, just when you look at your case studies. Your next slide, please. All right, political institutions. So I guess I'll go with the slides with this one. But a nation is a group of people that have a common identity. So I think that's the most common. I don't know why that word isn't there, but a common identity is the most important. I'll write it down for your notes. Nation equals common identity. Whether that's a language, a history, or a culture, or even geographic territory, though that one doesn't tend to be as strong. These groups can help form a nation. A nation can be a group of people like the Kurds, which all share a unique history and culture that unites them under an ethnicity or a nation. These are extremely important for the identities of these nations. And then we have a state, which is an association characterized by formal government institutions such as laws, permanent, this is the most important part, permanent geographic boundaries, and sovereignty. And another thing that's not mentioned here is recognition. The definition of a state stems from stems largely from having recognition of other countries. If a state is not recognized as legitimate by other countries, by other states, then it really cannot serve as a state. So yes, laws, permanent geographic boundaries, and sovereignty are all important. But if you don't have that recognition, which is embedded in the term sovereignty, then you don't have a state. So I know these two topics are a little bit difficult to understand, and they can overlap a lot. So you can have multinational states, which are states with multiple nations. So as we said, a nation is a group of people with a common identity, and a state is just a formal government. So if you have a state with multiple groups of people that share common identities, you have what's called a multinational state. So I'll take from our six core countries. China is a multinational state because it has many different ethnic groups within its boundaries, such as the Han Chinese and the Uyghur Muslims. They have different ethnicities and identities within the Chinese borders. So that characterizes China as a multinational state. Then we go in. Sean, you mentioned this in the chat, but now I'm going to go into stateless nations. So a stateless nation is a nation without a formal state. So if you have a common identity, but you don't have a truly common boundary or laws or sovereignty that helps identify you as that nation, then you are a stateless nation. So, as mentioned, the Kurds or Kurdistan is not officially recognized, I don't think, by any United Nations member as a country. Although they have fought for independence and things like that, they are not officially recognized, and they don't have their own permanent geographic boundaries or sovereignty. So that's because there are other countries in that region that tend to fend off or find less importance within these groups. So Kurdistan is one that comes to mind. I guess the countries in those regions are really like Iran, Iraq, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Syria is also in there, or Turkey. Turkey's a big one. So they take away from the forming of a state for those nations. So that's what gets in the denomination of a stateless nations. And you'll find many examples of this when you're looking at comparative politics. And sorry, I got distracted by the chat. You'll find many examples of this, and often stateless nations do make the most uproar because they tend to have the biggest fights for independence, because that's what they want. They want to share a common identity within a state with permanent geographic boundaries and laws. And then I guess I'll move on to our nation states, which I guess a lot of stateless nations want to be. Nation states are nations with formal states. So they are states without really diversity in nations. They're not multinational states like China or the United States. But they really have only one ethnicity or group of people in common within their boundaries. So I think the most potent example of this tends to be Japan and Korea, the Eastern Asian countries, because they really only have one ethnicity within their borders, which is the Japanese, and thus the Koreans generally. Yes, of course, there might be some immigration of these groups of people, but for the most part, it will only be the Japanese and Korean people within these respective countries. These are the political institutions, the nation and the state. Next slide, please. All right. I think this is my last slide. So now we'll make the distinction between a government and a regime. So a government are the people that are currently in charge within a state. So they are the people that are currently making decisions for a country. Like, for example, in the United Kingdom, the government right now is the current representative sitting in the House. The MP is sitting in Parliament. That is the current government. While a regime is very different because it's the institution and practices that adhere from government to government. So constitutions tend to be a big deal when defining regimes. Like the US Constitution, the Nigerian Constitution, or the Mexican Constitution, they are all the definitions of regimes because they instill the practices and the institutions that stay within governments and stay within transitions of power. Regime changes are typically more common in less developed countries, and less common in more developed countries, while government changes typically are the opposite, where government changes happen a lot more smoothly and transitionally in more developed countries, as compared to less developed countries, or more specifically authoritarian regimes. I think regime changes could happen in things such as coups or just um, general rebellion can instill a regime change, and they're a lot more rare. Which is government change usually occurs only through elections or death. Um, so yeah, this is important to know. So next slide, please, and Nishka, we'd be happy to see you here.
Hi, I'm Nishka. I'm back. I'm going to be teaching this portion of the slides. Just again, we have 3 hours here together, so feel free to share anything in the chat, related to what we're talking about, or any other questions you have, or just anything about the course, or even just, talk about with us. We'd love to sit and chat with you guys. And I saw the question about where you can access the replay. So since you all have access to the Cram sessions, you should be able to access all the replays through there, and they'll be sent basically exactly when this Cram ends at 10, so they'll be there every night. So yeah. Moving on to types of institutions, these are the big three. So the executive, legislative, and judiciary. This should be pretty easy, as the United States government has, the same 3 branches, so it's not something that's super new. But these are applicable to every government across the world. So first is the executive power. They are like the ones who enforce the rules, and they're the authority figures. So think president, prime minister, these type of people. They have the power to execute the law. The executives, they're the ones who are able to enforce actions. The scope of the power depends on the country. So for example, a country like the UK, like the prime minister, is a bit more democratic. So the executive powers are more in check by the other branches of government. But for example, say China or even Iran, where it's a more authoritarian government, and even Russia. So in Russia, the prime minister / president is Putin, and he has a lot more power than, for example, Rishi Sunak, the prime minister of the UK. So the power of the executive branch is really based on how democratic the regime is, and just certain checks that each branches have on each other. And then finally, the executive branch can also be infused with the legislative branch. So think the UK. The UK executive branch is with the legislative branch. So their parliament is actually both branches. So while Rishi Sunak is in the legislative branch, he has executive authorities. So yeah. The legislative is the second branch. They are the branch that makes the law. So think of like a Congress, a House of Senate, House of Lords, House of Commons for the UK example, the Majalis for Iran, the People's Congress for China. Think the governing body that is creating laws. Members are typically elected in democracies, and they're representative of states. So for example, a certain state gets a certain number of representatives in a legislature typically. And then finally, when you hear the term bicameral legislator, which a few countries have, for example, UK, Mexico, just to name a few, that means they have 2 houses, typically a lower house and an upper house. So that is what Mexico has. The UK has the House of Commons, which is the lower house, and the House of Lords, which is the upper house. And then finally, the judiciary, they are like the court systems and the ruling systems. So they are able to basically decide if there's any conflictions within the constitution or the laws of the nation, and the final say of the land. So they handle all legal disputes in the court systems, and then they interpret, defend, and apply laws in legal cases. So whenever there is, a problem arises with laws that the legislative makes, it's up to the judiciary to decide who is actually in the wrong and what parts of the laws are being upheld, and it's up to their own interpretation. Making it to the next slide, please. All right, perfect. And then I've kind of was touching on this in the previous slide, but the two main types of political regimes that we'll see in this course are authoritarian and democratic. So it's really important that you know these two types of regimes and their distinctions, because based on the type of regime, the powers are different. For example, I mentioned with the executive branch, authoritarian governments typically have more power in the executive branch and less checks versus a democratic regime. So these are comparisons that are really important for you guys to know for the AP exam for the multiple choice, and it'll also help your FRQs be a little bit more in depth. So authoritarian are what you think of. The little emoji there is like the flexing arm thing, which is exactly what they are. They're a lot stronger. They're typically not as democratic, and they have more power in the hands of a strong central government. So this means their executive branch has a lot more power, and there's less checks, and that one or a few people have more power rather than the general public. And then it's ruled by law, which means that the government is typically able to change rules or laws at their whim and are not held accountable by certain laws. So, for example, a great example of this is Russia, where Putin was able to sort of change the term limits of prime minister versus president to keep himself in office. Also, we can see this in China, where Xi Jinping completely took away term limits of the executive branch so he could stay in office for longer. So these are typically things that are characterized by authoritarian regimes and would not be allowed in democratic regimes, because the other branches of government, like I previously mentioned, have checks or ways to limit the power of the executive branch. And then finally, order and control is greater than rights and personal liberties. So something that also characterizes authoritarian regimes is the fact that they value stability and power and control of the people rather than personal rights and freedoms. So we can see that in authoritarian regimes such as Russia and China, a lot of the media is state-owned and state-controlled, and people have less rights and freedoms when it comes to protesting, freedoms of speech, or other of these freedoms that we may take for granted. And this is important because the less rights and liberties they have and the more control is established, the easier it is for the authoritarian, regime in power and the government to assert their will and control the people. And we can see, in comparison to a democratic regime where people have personal rights, liberties, and freedoms, people are able to voice their opinions, stand against the government, and are able to, I guess, just be a little bit more free and check the government themselves. Moving on to democratic regimes. So if you break down the word democratic, we see demos means people, and then kratos means power. So essentially, democratic means power is in the hands of the people. So that's the key philosophy behind a democracy, is that the people are the ones who give the ruling government power, as opposed to authoritarian regimes where the people in power are in power because of force or militant rule or something along the lines of it. Whereas a democratic regime, the people are typically electing whoever they want to represent them in the legislative, judicial, and executive branches. So the people get to decide who they want in power, or the majority. So democratic regime has rule of law, which is different than rule by law. So rule of law means that everyone is held to the same standard under the law. So for example, if the president or prime minister does something illegal in a democratic regime, they will be held to the same standard as a normal civilian, and they would have to follow the laws, and they can't just change laws based on whatever they want that'll help them. And another note is that rule of law is fair because everyone is held to the same standards, and the government isn't able to just change a rule whenever they want. And then finally, democratic regimes prioritize protections of rights and liberties. Think, for like example, written constitutions or written rights in the Constitution, and these rights and liberties help keep people more free, and have more freedom along these nations, and also help to promote democracy, as if the people don't like something that the government is doing, they are able to take action and voice out their concerns. Again, the power is in the hands of the people, so if the people don't like something, they have the power to change or fix that, as compared to an authoritarian regime where they wouldn't. Next slide, please.
Can I add something?
Of course.
Yeah, so regarding civil rights and liberties, I think it's key to remember that they're different, though they overlap when it comes to when a state is writing like their constitution or a Bill of Rights, for example. We're talking both about rights and freedoms, but I did want to emphasize that we will touch on that topic later on at another night. So come back for the cram sessions so you can learn about that more in depth.
Yep,
That's
I was
all.
just
Thank
giving an No, of course. That was a great. I was just giving an overview of, I guess, just how they're managed in each country, but we'll go into more in depth what the rights and liberties are in the future. So just know that authoritarian regimes typically restrict these rights, and then democratic regimes promote and help them. So what? So why does this matter? Why does the type of government and the governmental system matter? So it determines the role of citizens in political processes. So the types of governments dictate how much or how little the civilians play in the role of electing officials, making laws, policies, and just having their voice and opinion in the government. So this is why voting is something that is a key tenet to democracy. As people are able and citizens are able to shape political processes and shape societal values, which is the next bullet point. You can see the little Mean Girls meme that's in there that I love. Get and loses, we're going voting, because that's something huge to democracies where voting is, again, essential and important, because it democratic regimes influence decision-making policies. So the people and the media are able to influence what policies are made, who are elected, and certain political processes that impact the laws and legislative made that impact all civilians. And then finally, the type of government can impact the structure and type of democracy or economy. And this is also due to who is in power. So, and the government controls what type of economy a state has. So, for example, in a democratic regime, if you aren't happy with the economic choices your government is making, you can either vote to elect a new party or work to create laws and legislation and advocate for other policies that support yourself. And then finally, governments affect the liberty of media and civil society. So this kind of goes with the civil rights and liberties that we were talking about. Authoritarian regimes typically limit media and civil society or have state-owned media. And democratic regimes have more free media, so people are able to voice their own opinions and, I guess, just be free. Also, I saw a comment, my teacher taught this course by country. Would this review still be beneficial? My teacher taught this course by country too, as most people, and I think this review would really be beneficial because the AP exam structures the units by themes, not countries, and so the exam is more structured in themes of the country and being able to compare and contrast those themes. So learning each of the countries in isolation is great, but the biggest part about COGO is that you have to be able to compare each of the governmental systems. So learning it by theme again and just relearning these concepts in a more compare and contrast manner, it will really, really help you for like the FRQs and being able to compare countries, because that's what the FRQs ask you to do. So I hope that helps your question. So yeah, I would stick around. And then the other meme, when you have freedom of press, but it's also illegal to criticize the government in the press. This is something that's kind of making fun of more Russia and China, where they technically do have media. They have free press, but it's really state controlled because it's illegal to say anything back to the government. You can't really criticize the press, for example. If I can get the next slide, please. Awesome. All right. So let's see where our AP COGO 6 fall under the authoritarian and democratic regime. I've kind of touched on this a little bit, but just to clarify for anyone who doesn't know, we can see in authoritarian, the two biggest ones are China and Russia. So China is an autocracy, which means that there are a couple people in the, or an oligarchy is a better way to describe it. So there's a few people who are at the top that have the central power. So Xi Jinping and his cabinet are typically the ones we're thinking about who solidify the power. So they're not exactly like a dictator, which is one person has the power. An autocracy and oligarchy is a few people or a group, a small group that control everything. Russia is in a liberal democracy and also kind of an oligarchy. So Russia claims to be a democracy where they have elections, they have the media, they have things of democratic regimes, but they're not transparent, they're not free, and they don't fulfill the requirements to be democratic. So that's why we call them illiberal democracy, because they have these processes in place, but for example, they have a constitution, but like I've mentioned before, Putin is able, because of rule by law, to change things at his whim or adapt to things. So that's why it's an illiberal democracy. So just having these processes such as voting and a constitution and elections and all this stuff is not enough to be a democracy. These processes have to actually be free and uphold the values of democracy mentioned in the previous slide. So let's move on to democracy real quick. The big three are Great Britain, Nigeria, and Mexico. Those are what the little abbreviations mean. So Great Britain is a constitutional monarchy, so they are probably the closest thing to, or yeah, the closest to a true democracy. They're very similar to the way the United States is structured, so you can kind of think of that. Don't use the United States, but it's good to have a reference point if that's something that's familiar to you. They are a constitutional monarchy, though, so they do have a monarchy as their head of state. But monarchy doesn't really do anything. They're kind of at this point just there for show, and they don't really have any governing or executive power. They're kind of just there as figureheads. We all love, looking at the royal courts drama. At least I do. I keep up with the royal family. So yeah, but they do have a constitution, and they do have an executive, legislative, and judicial branch with the parliament, and then their judicial system, which was actually pretty newly created. And their constitution is upheld by the parliament, and the parliament has two houses, the upper and lower house, and the lower house is elected by people. And for example, the prime minister is also elected by people, so therefore they meet the requirements of a democracy and also have pretty fair, pretty free elections and uphold media and civil rights. And then finally, Nigeria and Mexico are kind of down the list. They are representative democracies, and when I learned it, we were told that Nigeria was almost a transitional democracy because both of these countries have had authoritarian rules in the past and are transitioning into more democratic spaces. So, for example, like Nigeria created a constitution more recently and are trying to adapt processes. Mexico is very similar, where they're working to make elections and things more fair and free by having more, for example, electoral committees and things along those lines. So both of these governments are democracies and are trying to move towards more democratic places, and having more fair media and having more elections are the two ways these countries are doing it. And then finally, Iran is kind of out of place here. So Iran is a theocracy, which means they are ruled by a religious governing body, and for the purposes of Iran, they are ruled by Islam. So, for example, their supreme leader is a religious figurehead, as well as the executive holds most of the executive power. He serves for life. So Iran could typically be more characterized as authoritarian, even though they do have elections for some people in their majalis and their Congress. Those people have to be vetted by the Guardian Council and the supreme leader. And there's a lot of religious influence that goes into picking the politicians and picking who are going to be in power. So therefore, even though they are elected, they have to meet certain religious standards or rules, therefore making it a theocracy.
If I could add on really quick.
Yeah.
This vetting process too, kind of adding on to what Nishka was saying, this vetting process prevents reformers from taking power. If you're going in there as an Iranian politician and you're wanting to change things and change the way that the government is working, even if you're very popular with the people, you're not necessarily able to do that because you could get vetted and denied. And that kind of ties into Iran's authoritarianism and struggles with having like a democratic system too.
Awesome. All right, and I think this is my last, or no, I have one more slide, sorry. So let's talk about the slide to authoritarian regimes and the ladder to democratic. So you can kind of think about it as like democratic or authoritarianism is a very slippery slope into authoritarian power, and then climbing out of it to a more democratic because there are steps and processes you need to take. So, for example, authoritarian regimes, powerful individuals have the justification of consolidating power by calling it tradition. So, to become more authoritarian, it's a slippery slope. Whereas one action can create another action, which is why we've seen, for example, in past histories, dictators rise to power because it's just a slippery slope when one person takes power. And then there's kind of the ladder to democracy. We can see in Nigeria and Mexico, as they're more transitioning governments, they're climbing up that ladder. And for example, authoritarianism and democracy and regimes of government are kind of a scale too. We can see governments that are more democratic, less democratic, more authoritarian, and less authoritarian. So more authoritarian governments would slide more to the one side and slide to the other. So you can kind of think of it as more of a spectrum instead of absolutes. So again, back to the authoritarian, they place limits on who can participate in politics. So, for example, like Zach mentioned, the vetting process limits is exactly what that's for. The vetting process limits who can be placed into the government so that Iran's theocracy can stay in place, and that reformists and people who have opposing viewpoints don't actually get power because they don't pass the vetting process. We can see the same thing in Russia or China, where opposing political parties or opposing factions don't get the same government that they typically would in a democratic regime. And then those in power for authoritarian regimes set laws and rules but don't necessarily follow them. So again, in Russia and China, we've seen Russia has a constitution and China has laws, but the people in power are able to change the laws when they want, when it's convenient for them, and they don't necessarily follow these laws. So we can see kind of more corruption in the government on these areas. So, for example, a great rubber stamping is kind of a good example of this, is that let's take Russia, for example. They do have a court system and they kind of do have these processes in place, but because the judicial system is made up of people who support Putin and his ideals, because he was the one who put them in their place, they kind of just agree with everything he says, and they sort of just rubber stamp all the legislative and all the policies, so they don't actually contradict the rules or actually, say anything against them. And then finally, the authoritarian regimes construct artificial enemies to distract and divide. So it's kind of the idea of, the enemy of the enemy is my friend. So to kind of maintain power, authoritarian regimes kind of basically say, oh, this person is our enemy, so we need to fight them. So we all need to come together and fight against a common enemy. And this kind of gives people a sense of camaraderie, a sense of purpose. So even though they see the red flags in their government, there's kind of a power or another authority figure they need to fight. This is kind of in the Middle East, where there's a lot of anti-US rhetoric that's kind of to keep the people together, as they have now a common purpose to fight together. So even if they don't necessarily agree with their government, or there's different factions their government, it kind of is able to consolidate them and distract them from what their government is doing and divide other factions. And then moving on to the democratic slide, the ladder up to democratization. So first and foremost, the establishment of rule of law, which we mentioned before, is following the rules, and fair and free elections. So if you remember back a few slides, we talked about how elections are really, really central to democracy, because democracy means power in the hands of people. So having elections is not enough, because, like I mentioned before, Russia has elections, but because they're not free or fair, they don't actually mean anything. So that's really key to a democracy. Secondly, they protect human rights and civil liberties. Like we said before, the more rights, the more civil liberties people have, the more freedom they have, and the more they're able to voice their opinions and keep the government in check. So democracies have increased participation of citizens in politics and political life. So in a democracy, it's very encouraged to see people vote, to see people run for office, like different people, like people from all different perspectives run for office, petition the government, protest the government, be involved in the media and other portions of civil life, like civil society, because in democracy, the idea is that people will kind of conjoin their beliefs and This is a good thing, as opposed to authoritarian regimes where they try to limit citizens' involvement in politics as much as possible because they only want people who support them in power to, be ruling or be involved in politics. Whereas in democracy, they are found of challenge, and they are found of, I guess, not conflict, but I guess challenging certain viewpoints, and that's what makes it a democracy. Because if you disagree with the government, you are allowed to say something, and you are allowed to be active in your government. And yeah. And then finally, open access to information. So transparency is key, super, super, super key in any form of democracy, because people and the civilians have a right to know what is going on in their government, how it's functioning, what is going on. So, for example, elections, how those processes are being held, the Congress or their executive and legislative branches, how they're making laws, how the judiciary is ruling on laws. And so people are able to see if there's corruption or see if the government's doing something wrong, as opposed to authoritarian regimes, which again kind of just try to slide everything under the mat and just say everything's okay, we're doing what we need to do. Yeah. If I can have the next slide. Thank you. And then finally, governing structures.
This is me and Anjani's, by the way. So
Sorry.
we got you're good, don't worry, but we got a quiz coming up. I think David's gonna bring us into it.
Oh, of course.
All right, guys. Nishka, if you want to stay here with me to help explain some of the questions, that would be awesome.
Sure.
And I mean, I'd take any help. So we're gonna be doing a quick quiz on what we reviewed so far. These few subunits that we reviewed on Unit 1. So let me make it available to everybody. So right below, I just made a call to action that's labeled first half quiz. You guys should be able to join that. And then from then we'll get started.
Can they join it after I start it?
I don't know.
Well, let's find out. I'll start it now.
You are?
No, just kidding.
I think if we can give it like 1 or 2 minutes, just so everybody can figure it out. If anybody has any questions pertaining to like the quizzes or anything, please feel free to ask. We'll have a couple of these throughout the nights. These are like fun little Kahoot style quizzes. And yeah, just to test your knowledge, to test your recall, your note taking.
Okay, style questions. So if you want, like, I guess a teaser of what the multiple choice would be like for you guys.
Yeah.
These are really good to have.
I'm going to start now because it hasn't moved past 8. Right.
Okay, let's get started. All right. I went over this at the beginning. So what does GDP stand for in the context of comparative government? Does it mean governmental development policy, global data procurement, governance and democracy promotion, or gross domestic product? Wait for that last person to answer. There we go. Sean, if you could please reveal them. Awesome. All of you got it right. I guess I'll just go over it just really quick, but you guys all know gross domestic product, or GDP, is a measure of a country's output. I'm not going to go over the economic side of it, but it is a quantitative measure that we use in comparative government to compare different governments and their I guess effectiveness or potential. So that's extremely important when we look at the quantitative side of comparative government. Next question. Oh, music.
We got the music. John, can you turn it down a little?
Hey, we just got the music. Now you tell me to turn it down? Come on.
All right.
We need to be able to hear too.
All right, that's good. What type of data involves evidence gathered by observation or experimentation, providing factual evidence for political scientists to make hypotheses and inferences about the world? So we didn't, wow, my guitar is really loud. So we didn't fully cover this, we did go over the concepts of quantitative and qualitative analysis. Oh wait, I think somebody else joined. So, Sean, yes, it does work if you just click on the link. So we went over quantitative and qualitative analysis, but now going over normative and empirical data, we'll see if any of those are our options. All right. Wait. Oh wait, but the music is gone. But it was cute. You can't like have it like a little bit, just like.
I think it's because we revealed the answer. I think it's only like while we're waiting for like.
Yeah, when
So you can
like
talk and
Jeopardy.
explain.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Maybe
So
you shouldn't be talking over asking the questions.
wow, thanks. My input is not unnecessary.
Let David read the questions, you know.
All right. So as we said before, quantitative analysis is the numbers that are gathered for comparative government, and then qualitative analysis is subjective opinion or religion or whatever that covers it. But the important aspect of this question is where it says the factual evidence to make hypotheses and inferences. So comparative politics is still part of political science, and political science is indeed somewhat of a science. It is a little bit soft, more considered soft science. But we still use empirical data, which is data that is acquired through experimentation in the scientific method, which is why I totally understand why, actually, most people chose qualitative analysis in comparison to quantitative analysis. I would understand choosing the option quantitative analysis because it has to do with numbers. But empirical data is what's actually gathered from like actual experimentation. Qualitative analysis is how we look at like it's very subjective, so you can't really make full blown factual inferences or hypotheses about the world using that. So, yeah.
Can I jump in really quick?
Please.
And it's questions like these where it's very important where you take a moment and actually read the question. You'll see in the first bit of it, it asks what type of data, right? And from that, we can pretty easily break down that it's going to be B or C because of it. We know that it's going to be a type of data because quantitative analysis and qualitative analysis aren't actually the data itself. It's modes of analysis and using that data to do types of analysis. Yeah, I don't know how to conclude that, but basically, I think it's very helpful to read the questions, and you can often find little hints in here, like you did for this question, to try and eliminate some answers.
No, and I actually think that's so important. Not even only for comparative politics, but like for any of the 30 something whatever AP courses, reading the question is so important. Because a lot of times the answers in the question or the answers in prior or post the question. So if you just read, you might just get the answer. So reading is definitely number one. Next question, please. I'll try to read this over the music. But how do political scientists most commonly define state? Wow! That is so cool. It's like World Cup music. Alright, so how do political scientists most commonly define state? I think Bella likes this music a lot. Anyways. Is a state a defined territory with sovereignty that has institutions making and enforcing policies? Is it B, an organization providing public services? C, a collective aiming for global influence? Or D, a group with shared national identity?
This is confusing.
All right. We could reveal the answer, please. Okay, awesome. You guys all paid attention when we went over states and nations. So remember, a state is a defined territory with sovereignty, which sovereignty is also has a lot to do with recognition from other states, that has institutions making and enforcing policies. Remember, states can have one nation, which is a nation state, or states can have many nations, defining a multinational state. Remember, a nation is a collective group of people, not necessarily with a state, that have a
Answer
common
choice
identity,
D.
such as religion. Sorry?
I said answer choice D.
Oh, yeah, exactly. With a common identity, history, such as the Kurds. So, yeah, you guys did really well on that one.
So be sure in questions like these, like for example, question D was the definition for a nation. So sometimes like they'll try to trick you, because nation and state are things people typically tend to confuse. So you guys did a really good job not falling into that trap. So really good job.
Which term refers to a group of people who share commonalities such as language, race, or religion? I'm fully expecting all of you to get this one right because we just touched on this.
Would you?
Those two people. All right.
Can you get reveal answer, please?
I don't know if Sean can hear us over all this music.
Reveal the answer.
I turned my volume down because Bella keeps telling me it's too loud. So all right.
It's better now, don't worry.
All right. I'm glad you guys answered nation for this one. So, maybe it won't be this obvious on the AP exam, but there'll definitely be questions paired up like this on the exam that will basically be given to each other's. So if you just know one topic, you'll know the other. So as we mentioned before, a state has a formal government and by recognition. So the other option was a group of people with a national identity, and that is defined by a nation. As I went over before, you have your stateless nations, your nation states, and your multinational states. Remember, a stateless nation is a nation without any actual borders or boundaries, such as Kurdistan. I guess it does have borders and boundaries, but it doesn't have any sovereignty or recognition. It is controlled by the majority by the country of Turkey and Iran. So that is a stateless nation.
I thought it didn't have borders. You said it was part of other countries.
It has borders with where you can find certain like Kurdish people,
Not
but
defined borders.
well, yeah, they're not defined or formal in any way. Like you can't, you don't need a passport check to enter Kurdistan because there is no true state or formal government that's there.
However, there are generally accepted borders that are plurality or majority Kurdish people that share that those similar cultural values and religion and language, and that stays pretty consistent. And we can see that in our other examples for our course countries too.
Next
question, please.
So Rachel, everybody except for me, because I teach it, took the exam and they all got a 5. So they know their stuff.
What statement?
Right. Oh, okay, go for it.
Which statement is true about regimes? A. Regimes are enduring even after transition of government. B. Regimes are solely defined by democratic principles. C. Regimes are either federal or unitary. And D. Regimes easily change after transition of government. Oh, where'd the music go?
No, wait, that's too much. It's gonna blast it again.
I don't even hear it.
No, but then
Is
what
it
if it
gonna
starts like the next
restart?
question?
Oh, maybe on the next. Yeah, maybe on the next question.
No, it's.
Sean, don't blast it, please.
I'll put it as loud as I want.
If you can reveal the answer. Good job. Okay, perfect. All right. Yes, regimes are enduring even after a transition of government. So remember that a regime is a type of government, authoritarian, democratic, theocracy. So even if the governmental system or the people in charge, a party system change from government to government, the regime still stays the same, but it is not impossible to change regimes. Just note that it's possible, but regimes do endure after government transitions. So,
Yeah, I was wanted to add to that. The regimes are tend to be, it's a lot more rare for a regime to change, but it's a lot more common for that rarity to happen in developing nations or in countries that are struggling to maintain their regimes or their legitimacy, which is a topic we'll go over later. Regimes are solely defined by democratic principles is not true, which is answer choice B, because regimes they can definitely be part of authoritarian regimes. And I think in large part, regimes tend to be really linked with governments in authoritarian regimes, because they don't change. Like there is no exchange of power, as seen with democratic regimes. But that does not mean that regimes are. That does not mean that governments and sorry, I lost my train of thought. That does not mean that regimes don't change in authoritarian principles or countries. Regimes are either federal or unitary. I guess that has nothing to really, not too much of the question. And then regimes easily change after a transition of government. That's not really true. Of course, it's facilitated when a country is on the brink of collapse or very new or weak, but regimes tend to be the strongest part of a governing body, and regimes tend to like persevere, and
also,
they define a country.
if I can just jump in for a second, this is not about the content, but about the way this question is structured. I'm not really sure if you'll see any questions this exact to the format, but if you see, for example, A and D are polar opposites of each other, so the regimes endure or regimes usually change. They're literally opposite questions, so it's kind of safe to assume that one of the two will be correct because one of them has to be correct in some way. Either they do easily change or they don't easily change. So that's kind of a great way to process of elimination. If you see two answers that are saying, oh, this does happen or this doesn't happen, one of those is bound to be your answer. So that's a little multiple choice tip to keep out for.
Next question, please.
All right. What are we taking bets? Is there going to be music or no?
I think there will be.
I think there will be.
You think there will be? Okay. Let's see.
Yeah.
Let's see. Here we go.
Yes.
Oh, Sean, turn it down.
Oh, you can't be happy. You just can't be happy.
All
I'd be
right.
happy if you turned it down, Sean.
No, don't turn it off.
Wait, actually, that's a really good volume. I like that volume a lot.
This is
Oh, yeah.
perfect.
Okay. How does an electoral system function in an authoritarian regime compared to a democratic regime to facilitate participation in policy making? So answer choice A is limited or controlled by the government. B is open and fair elections without restrictions. C is equal representation for citizens. Or D, frequent referendums on major policy issues. Does an electoral system function in an authoritarian regime?
Sean, can you?
All right.
All right.
Good job, you guys.
Do you want to take this, Nishka, or do you want me
Yeah,
to go?
for sure. So how do an electoral system in authoritarian regimes compare to democratic regimes facilitate participation in policymaking? So the way I would go about this question is first just okay, basically this is asking you to compare authoritarian regimes to democratic regimes. It literally says authoritarian compared to democratic. So just keep in your mind, know the difference between those two regimes and what are we comparing it on? Policymaking. So if you look at the answer choices, obviously the correct answer is A, because authoritarian regimes limit or are controlled by the government. So for policymaking, I guess just make sure when you're doing these type of questions, look for those buzzwords. So authoritarian and democratic are two big buzzwords, and then compared is another. So if I had like a paper, I would just be underlining these terms. And so that helps you, because if you remember the slides, we talked about a big comparison is how much control the government had. So knowing these kind of things helps you quickly answer these questions. And then obviously, we know that authoritarian regimes don't really have open, fair, free, or elections. That's more democratic regimes. They don't equally represent all citizens because they only want certain people in power, and they don't have frequent referendums on major policy issues because they typically are rule of law, not rule of law, and do basically as they please. So yeah.
I guess what I wanted to add is that if the question was flipped and it said, how does an electoral system function in a democratic regime compared to the authoritarian regime, it would be the complete opposite. B, C, and D would be correct.
Right.
As Nishka would mentioned, the elections in authoritarian regimes really only serve as a rubber stamp. They don't really carry any weight. They just carry as a form to procure legitimacy. So
Oh, I don't know what happened to David, but another thing that I would
sorry
just
guys,
add
I
is,
think I was cut off.
oh no, you want to keep going?
Oh no, I can't hear anything.
We can hear you. Okay, well, while he's fixing that, I was just gonna say another small test taking tip is like if you really don't know how to like answer a question like this, you don't know what the question is asking, look at the answer choices and like again, remember the word compare. I would like what I would do is be like, okay, is A function of an authoritarian or democratic? Authoritarian. Is B authoritarian or democratic? Democratic. And then do that with ABC, and then you'd kind of see that there's only one that pertains to authoritarian regimes, and that would be your answer choice. So if I can see the next question. Okay, which political system grants the most power to citizens? A, a monarchy, B, a democracy, C, authoritarianism, and D, communism. Right. And we can answer, please. Sean? Oh, perfect. Congrats. Good job, you guys. All of you got it right. Just again, to reiterate, most power to the citizens. If you remember from the slides, democracy literally means demo. Crossy like literally translates to power and people. So again, like the basic theme of democracy is power to the people or power in the hands of the people. So out of all the other regimes, the most power is in democracy, just by the name and by what we know of it. So they grant this power by more rights and fair and free elections and things like that. A monarchy wouldn't be right because if you remember, a monarchy is when there's a king and a queen and they're kind of through lineage, they're the people who are in charge. So the people really can't do anything. It's only if you're born royalty, you're royalty. And then again, C, authoritarianism. We know that authoritarian don't want people, so don't want citizens to have power. Hopefully by now you're kind of drilled the difference between authoritarian and democratic. So we know that authoritarian has a lot of central power in one or a few people. And then finally, communism. We didn't really touch communism in these slides, but just know that communism isn't something that you kind of need to know for the AP exam. But communism, yeah, not an answer choice.
Something I'll add on really quick is that monarchy isn't inherently authoritarian or democratic. Oh, hey, David's back. Is it working for him?
Hey guys, can you hear me?
Yes.
We can hear you.
Oh, I have a really bad echo, but my crowdcast just completely like died on me. But I am back.
Welcome back. Anyways, like I was saying, democracy and monarchy aren't inherently contradictory to each other. So, for example, in our course country, the United Kingdom, it's our most democratic country. It's our prime example of what a democracy like is, like a full democracy, and it is a constitutional monarchy. And so it's just a quick important note. Monarchy isn't necessarily democratic or authoritarian.
We can have the next question.
Can I add something before we move? I'm sorry.
Oh.
Go ahead.
I can't stop it.
You can turn off the music.
How about we
Yeah.
wait till the answer? We get to the
Yeah, there we go.
answers. Or we can do that.
You want me to stop
No,
sharing?
it's because no. I just mentioned this real quick, because you were talking about how populism was something that was included in the last few years, and that was not necessarily explained in the previous question. But just so you guys know, populism is a type of, I guess, strategy in which politicians kind of want to appeal to the ordinary people, so to the common people. And we'll go more about that in depth later if that's something that you guys want to study more. But basically they create like the population versus the enemy, and that's a tactic that is very much used by people to kind of gain control and gain power and gain, I guess, the approval of the masses, to be able to rise to power. So just think of populism as a mechanism to authoritarianism, and we'll talk more about that later. But please proceed with the quiz.
I'll take over this one. So it looks like 10 out of 9 people already answered, which is amazing.
That's how cool.
Another thing.
Not so stats.
But what type of government allows citizens to participate in the political process through regular, free, and fair elections? I won't go too in depth with this, but because you guys did great on it, but a democracy is consistent, and that is almost the essence of a democracy, where regular, free, and fair elections allow for the people to may have their voices heard, and so they can elect their leaders and elect their government, and it instill changes in government. Whereas theocracies, autocracies, and totalitarianism are on the complete opposite side of the spectrum. Okay, so what strategy might an authoritarian regime use to tackle the issue of overpopulation in urban areas without relinquishing centralized control? So that's asking without relinquishing central control, without losing control from the main federal government. We haven't gone over Unitarian federal systems, have we? No, we haven't. But I guess without losing that control from the main federal government, how can that government instill population control in these urban areas?
So this is an. I'm sorry.
No. You can. I mean.
I was just going to say this is an application question. So remember everything we taught you. So a lot of the questions in the AP exam are going to be application. So it's not just going to be like, there will be some that are just like, what does this mean? What is the definition? But this is like, okay, take what you know about authoritarian regimes. How would they handle X issue, or what would they do? Blah, 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 based on what you know. So keep that.
So the answers are A, promoting massive out-migration to peripheral regions by providing economic incentives for rural development. B, developing authority for social services to municipal governments to alleviate urban pressure. C, inviting foreign investors and non-governmental organizations to develop urban infrastructure. Or D, implementing strict population control policies to regulate citizen movement and residence. All right, reveal the answer. All right, so the answer was D, was the implementation of strict population control policies to regulate movement and residence. So we know that authoritarian regimes have full control and grasp over their citizenry. So options A and C use words such as promote and invite, which really relinquishes from the authoritarian regime from their strict nature and from their force that they can use to control their people. B says it, and I talked about how without relinquishing centralized control, how they want to keep that, and it says it in the question. So devolving authority wouldn't really help in what that authoritarian regime is looking to find. So by inviting or promoting, you're not really forcing anybody to do anything, and by devolving, you're relinquishing control. So D is really the only option that helps us there. Next question, please. All right. This is is another application question. Nishka, if you want to read it, the answers. Am I heard? Hello. Okay, I'll take over.
Okay, yeah.
So, oopsies, I don't think I was supposed to do that. Sorry, a little bit of technical difficulties. All right, we're back on track. Okay, this was answered pretty quickly, but I'll just read the question. If a hypothetical country, Demos, transitions from authoritarian to democratic system, which of the following would most likely indicate consolidation of its democracy? Okay. If we could reveal the answer, and then I'll go over the answer choices, where we have 12 out of 10 people.
Yep, this is incredible.
Wait, how is it 12 out of 10? I'm really confused.
I think people join after Sean showed the screen. All right. So if the hypothetical country was transitioning, which would most likely indicate the consolidation? So A, a rapid increase in the number of NGOs without political involvement. B, implementation of strict government controls. Over media and public discourse to maintain order. C, the establishment of dominant party system where one party wins all the elections. Or D, regularly held free and fair elections with peaceful transfers of power. So B and C, which I'm very happy none of you chose, has to do with actually the opposite, the consolidation of an authoritarian regime. As we said before, authoritarian regimes do everything possible to control their people. So the implementation of strict controls or the establishment of a dominant party really takes away all power from the people. A would make a lot of sense, and it does make a lot of sense when there's a lot of NGOs, because that means there's a lot of people participating in the government. But the key phrase there is without political involvement. If you want consolidation in a democratic regime, you need political involvement with your NGOs, or like some type of thing that they're trying to push. So yes, it makes sense, but that little phrase at the end makes that answer completely wrong. And then D, regularly held in free and fair elections, as I mentioned before. Oh, and the peaceful transfer of power. That's the essence of a democratic regime. So if you don't have that free and fair transfer election and transfer power, you don't have a fully democratic regime. So if it's a consolidated democracy, then you'll have a free and fair election with peaceful power. So you guys did really well on that one. All right, and I think we'll get back to our slideshow. I think, though, that we're going to be taking a break right now.
I think before we take a break, right, we're going to take a break shortly. Does anybody have any questions? Questions that we haven't gone over yet that obviously we might go over later, and we can tell you, hey, look, we're going to go over this. Or what happened? Just do you have a question? Any questions?
We're happy
Type
to answer, guys.
Because we want to help.
You guys did really well on the quiz.
Oh, jinx. Yeah, you guys did really good.
Obviously, we want to give you a break, but we also want to hear from you.
Let us know what you want us
to. During the break, well, we might all have our cameras off, but like some of us will continue to be here answering your questions over text or whatever. We'd be more than happy. If anything comes up that you're like, oh wait, did they touch on this? We'll be more than happy to touch on it now.
If we can get it to 8:25, we're good.
Anything?
Are you all still breathing? You're still there? I mean, obviously you're answering questions. You're there.
Yeah. I think the silence just means that we did a really good job explaining.
Do I put out the survey tonight? But I think if we do put out the survey, we're getting all 5s.
Right. just 5 is just like what everyone's gonna get on the AP exam when they take it soon. I forget the exact day.
Next Wednesday. I have a question.
Yes.
I have a question for the 5 of you. Did you all get 5s on all of your AP exams, or did you just? Are you just like really like? Is this is just your niche? This is like your thing?
Oh, I'm in the top left, aren't I? Oh, David, you go first.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I've taken a good amount of exams. I've gotten 5 on a few. But since it is a big part of my career path, I think comparative government is just like, yeah, as you said, like my niche. Like I love this course. Like, yeah, I got a 5 on I got a 5 on calculus and human geo.
Human geo makes sense with comp.
Because I've got
or BC.
AB.
I got 5s on all my social sciences, like AP classes, but like STEM, that's you do not get 5s.
No, but that's what I'm saying. Like I'm cool with STEM. Like I can get a 5 on it. I just that's like insane. It's not fun. That's not fun though. Like, isn't like Comp Gov so much more fun than like integration and derivatives?
Yeah, physics C. Don't ask me my score.
Anika.
All right. We got a question. Who wants
actually, I want to put to use our Q&A tab, so I'm going to post this comment as a question.
Yeah, but then you always delete them, and then we have to figure out the question.
No, Sean,
David's being a little extra right now.
No, you could just go to the answer tab of the questions tab.
Emily, I'm in the same boat right now. I'm so scared for the calc exam. I'm in the exact same place. I gotta channel my inner David, I think.
Emily and Zach, are you at AB or BC? Cal?
I'm in AB right now.
Nice.
Look.
Am I still let's
answer Anika's question.
Okay, answer the question.
For questions, and now you're talking about calc.
It's not on this age.
Somebody pressed done answering, and that's wrong. I feel like that was Sean.
David?
It's on there. It doesn't.
Oh, wait.
Okay, David, just don't click.
Just answer the question.
Okay, does it matter if we call Mexico or Nigeria a representative, emerging, or a constitutional democracy? I think in reality, no, and they're very intertwined terms. I think the term emerging democracy applies a lot more to Nigeria rather than Mexico, because Mexico's very much solidified its democracy within the past 2.5 decades, though Nigeria is still a little bit of teetering. But all the terms will work really well as long as you remember that, as long as you remember the little niches of the terms, and as long as you're able to identify both as a democracy in and of itself, where the people have consolidated the majority of the power. And that's what gives them a great distinction in comparison to Russia, China, and Iran. Whereas compared to the UK has been a consolidated democracy for almost over a century now, more than. So I think that's a great question, though. If anybody else wanted to answer that.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in and say maybe just stick with the terminology of your textbook or the College Board is providing to you. So I'd say you probably see that more, but you should definitely understand what each one of those terms means. But I think more than calling it like an emerging constitutional democracy, in this course, I know that they separate countries a lot between developed and less developed. So you can think of them, of Mexico and Nigeria, as representative democracies that are categorized as less developed nations. And then obviously you got to understand why they're considered less developed nations, and we'll definitely touch on that as well.
Also, I'd just say, like, obviously, like, knowing the terms and, like, now that you have to, like, study, it's, like, important, but as someone who probably didn't know as much as they should going into the exam, if you go into the exam and just call them a democracy, they will take it. I promise you. In the questions, like, they'll refer to it as a democracy, and if in the FRQ, if you say like Nigeria as a democratic government, or like transit almost democratic or something along those lines, like I promise you, I probably wrote something similar in my FRQs, and I'm assuming they took it. So don't worry too much on the nuances, because they also understand there's 6 countries and a lot to know. So don't get caught up on like this term versus this term. Just know the big picture ideas that they are a democracy or are trying to become more democratic.
I want to be on the main stage as a teacher. As a teacher, I actually connect all the teachers who teach AP Comp Gov. So I talk to, I don't want to say every, but most Comp Gov teachers in the country, and this is something we talk about all the time. And there's a ton of graders there, and they do something called norming, where they figure out, like, what are we going to accept as answers before they read your stuff, and then they read your stuff and figure out, hey, look, are we going to accept this? Yes or no. So don't get too caught up in the weeds on that stuff. They're trying to help you out as much as possible. So there is that. But that brings us almost to in about 29 seconds or so, it'll be 8:30, in which we will take a 10-minute break. And I'm just going to talk so eloquently for the next 20 seconds because I like to do things on the exact time.
Well,
And it
Sean, rather
probably,
than you talking eloquently, can I add something?
oh gosh.
We're on
You
our
have 9
fifth
seconds.
answer to one. We're on our fifth answer to one question, by the way. I wanted to point that out.
I added the slides and the cheat sheets right underneath for you to click on again. That was replaced with a quiz earlier, but just click on that. Okay, it's 8:30.
Yeah. Wait, hold on. I gotta put the thing up. All right. Hold on. I gotta. How do I do this? Share
But yeah,
screen.
if anybody has any more questions, someone will be here. So type it in the chat. Our cameras may be off, but there'll still be people here. So feel free to ask. Yeah.
No, why do you take away 10 of our seconds?
Because you were talking.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
hope
See
to
you in
see
10
you
minutes.
soon.
Or 9 minutes and 53 seconds, since Sean wants to be precise.
I'm still here. What am I gonna? It's almost time to come back. 23 seconds. I'm over here. I should probably do that more often. My mic. Hello. I like that a lot. But yeah. Is there a noise at the end of this? No? Okay. All right.
Heyo.
All right, somebody remind me which slide we got to.
19
We
is what we
should be transitioning at 19.
19. Here we go. Here we go. I can just pick 19, huh? Slide 19. Okay, government structures. Okay, who's up?
Me and Zach.
Yeah.
Jack. Okay. I'm going to enter full screen, and then I'm going to share my screen again. And here we go.
All right. Hey, everyone. I hope you all enjoyed the break. Maybe you got some water. Oh, we got Bella back here really quick. It seems Bella's having some tech issues right now, but it should be working out. All right. We're going to be talking about governing structures right now, and in particular, the difference between federal and unitary. And these terms may be familiar to you if you've taken US Gov. It's a very big thing there, but this is a bit different, and I'll be going into why. So, a federal system, as a good chance you know, it is a division of power compared to a unitary system where the power is united under one government. There's one system. Hey, Bella, welcome back.
Hello, I'm back. Sorry. Thank you.
Compared to a unitary system where the power is united into one strong central government. And then, like I said, the federal government power is divided between the central governments and regional governments, commonly called state or provincial or similar. So the pro of having a federal system is that you get to disperse power, and there's increased citizen participation. Because if I am participating in my state government, I know that I am getting the chance to change things. I can see it in my community more compared to the national government, which is much more broad and far out. And I really don't see the impacts that I, as a voter or a member of a community or organization, can have. And there's also multiple levels of government action. It allows for different governments to try different things because they share authority. The regional government may take one approach to solving a problem, while the federal government or the national government can take a different approach, and they can work together and use their authorities to bring progress to the people, especially in times of crisis. However, this is not always the case. There can be, in times of crisis, difficulties of working together, and that can make progress slow towards solving whatever crisis is. And this is a big pro of a unitary system in comparison. With the unitary system, there is heavy efficiency in responding to crisis because there is one central government that responds to these crises, right? Crises. And it's also very clear who is solving the problem, who has the authority in an area. If there is a crisis that is happening, and I see some government agency is solving it, and I'm living in a federal system, I don't know if that was my regional government. I don't know if that was my national government, my local government. I don't really know who did that, who is to thank, or alternatively, if there's an issue, who to blame. And this can create problems in a democracy. If I'm living in a democracy and I don't know right away who did this thing, who I should thank, who I should be blaming, that can lead to some levels of confusion and make things more complicated, or it could lead to me blaming the wrong organization or the wrong person for their mistakes, or thanking the wrong organization or wrong person. Compared to the unitary system where it's very clear, this was the central government because they are the ones that have all the power. And I went into some of the cons already while talking about the pros. But to federal, there can be inefficiency in addressing national issues. If there is an issue at the national level, but I'm too busy and the power is too invested at the state or regional level, it's going to be harder to solve that problem. Because there isn't the necessary attention or the necessary power for the national government to solve the issue. And there can also be disparities among regions. If there's being taxes paid or wealth paid to a regional government, the wealthier areas of the country are going to be doing better. They're going to be more prosperous. And the poorer areas are going to have a harder time getting their citizens out of poverty. Compared to a unitary government, where the unitary government can step in and maybe redistribute some of the resources, and so that there's more equality and that there's less disparity among the regions. And then for cons for a unitary system, there can be difficulty addressing local needs due to hypercentralism, is what we call it. That there's too much power invested in the unitary government, and therefore they aren't able to accurately address local issues, which makes that sense. The unitary government, the central government, already has so much to worry about. There's so many different things going on. They don't really have the time or ability to address hyper-local issues or issues that address a certain region. Or alternatively, if I am a representative from northern Nigeria, I don't really understand the problems of southern Nigeria. And if we're in a unitary system, I'm expected to be able to solve those problems. It's my job to solve the problems of regions that I don't necessarily belong to. And this is why we see, for example, Nigeria is a federal system, which makes sense when you really think about it. Nigeria has a lot of different ethnic groups, and because of that, having a federal system allows for those ethnic groups to have some say and ruling over themselves, which gives them more legitimacy, which I'll get into in a couple of slides too. And then we also see Mexico is a federal system. And here, especially in Mexico, it can be helpful to see the differences in state policy. And I'm going to commit the cardinal sin of referencing the United States government. Don't do this on your actual exam. It's just for explanation. I can see Anjani giving me a thumbs down. Don't do this. Never reference the United States government on your actual exam. But I'm going to use it for demonstration purposes. I'm assuming we have a lot of people that live in America here. Going from state to state, you're going to see differences and varieties in laws. For instance, in my state, Minnesota, there is basically no restrictions placed on abortion or buying marijuana. In David's case, he lives in Florida, where marijuana is illegal in non-medical situations. And that's a good example of how a federal system can lead to differences in regional governments. And it's the similar idea for Mexico. College Board in particular wants you to know abortion in Mexico. 2 states in Mexico allow for abortion up to 12 weeks, while the other ones, I think other 30 states, someone can correct me if I'm wrong, other 30 states don't allow for abortion. And that's an example of how policy can differ at the federal level. And then for unitary systems, we have Iran and China, which makes sense. They're both very authoritarian. The authoritarian governments there would want power consolidated and under their control. And then we also have the United Kingdom, which is our most democratic institution. But the United Kingdom is interesting because they have devolved a lot of their power, meaning that the unitary government has given a lot of their power to regional areas, such as Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And they have done this to increase legitimacy. They have done this that way the Scottish people, the Welsh people, and the Northern Irish people feel that they are being represented in their local areas. And although the power ultimately still resides in the national government, the unitary central government, lets these regional governments have power. And then Anjani, you want to take the next slide? Or if someone else...
Actually, I'm going to interrupt. So we have a poll we want to do a little refresher poll. So I'm making it visible right now. So let's see if you didn't forget. This is we hope it's easy. What is the defining feature of a democracy? One-party system, free and fair elections, a lot of NGOs, or federalism?
And we also have a question, by the way, Zach, that you might want to take. Emily said,
Sure.
on the test, is it still classified as unitary, right? I'm not sure what she's referring to.
It is still a unitary system, and it's a unitary system both on the test and in real life because the power still lies with the central government. There's no constitution that's separating the powers. It's more of a restraint thing that the United Kingdom is letting these regions have their own governance, such as Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. And that's why on the test, it might call it a devolved unitary state. I think that's the technically vocab term for it, a devolved unitary state. But it is at its heart still a unitary state, just one that is giving its powers away. If that makes sense, if that helps.
And by the way, guys,
push into the Q&A tab.
Yeah,
as well.
I was gonna just say, if you guys want to use the Q&A, it'll automatically pop up for us, so it's like more effective. So if you guys know how to do that.
But yeah,
we can give a couple
poll getting answered right now, and it seems they're all good. Okay, next slide then, or
yeah. Okay, so now we're on to sources of power. And what exactly, before we go into like the specific common sources of power, these are mechanisms where governments or groups or even institutions, they exert their influence and control within their own respective political system. So these really allow these governments to expand their authority and really, you know, not rule the system. So the three top you'll see on the CompGov exam is one, legitimacy. This is where state holds position of authority, where they're obeying state rules and they're seen as right or proper, and it's a stable source of power. So for example, in Nigeria, legitimacy can be seen through democratic elections and federal structure, while in Iran, legitimacy is seen through the theocratic legitimacy through the supreme leader and religious institutions. And then through China, it could be seen through the Communist Party rule or the economic performance legitimacy. So there's very different ways of sources of powers throughout the AP6 that you just need to make sure that you know the context so you can apply it. And then another, Russia, the semi-authoritarian regime with the strong presidency. Now for coercion, this is where the state uses force or threats, and they're obeying the state rules, and it's seen as the only option. This is usually, it provides instability. For example, in China, the People's Liberation Army and the state security apparatus can be seen as coercion, while in Nigeria, it could be influences of ethnic militias like Boko Haram and corruption within security forces. And then lastly, in Mexico, it could be seen through drug cartels and organized crime. So every single one of the AP6, they often do have these sorts of powers used in their government, but they're different ways, which you could see through the examples. And then persuasion. This is when the state appeals to people's emotion, an instinctive urge to obey state rules, and the emotions are inherently unstable. So, for example, in Mexico, a lot of these with the persuasion, it's very similar. So in Mexico, it's like media manipulation, political rhetoric. Nigeria, political speeches. Iran, it's a lot of the religious influences because of that theocratic government. And then in China, it's propaganda through state-controlled media, censorship with the online wall. I forgot, I'm blanking, but the online wall. And then in UK, it could be political speeches and media influence. So to really understand persuasion, it's just the state, the government really persuading to the common people by using the various means that happens. So we can go to the next slide, unless anyone has questions.
And then I believe this one is mine. All right. So, sorry, trying to get my notes in order. So we have three main authorities that legitimacy can come from, and there are other ones that I might talk a little bit about later when I'm going country by country at the end of the slide. But these are the three main ones. Tradition, which is kind of the idea that this is how things have always been. If I've had a government that acts a certain way, that has a religion, has had the same religion for the past 100 years, I'm not really going to want to change that because that's all I really know. That gives the government legitimacy. Or if the government has been around for a while, I'm not going to want to change it because it's been around for so long. It's all I really know. There's charisma, and a good example of looking for charisma as like a prime example would probably be Vladimir Putin. in Russia. There is still a lot of opposition to Putin, but he is a charismatic leader. He is fairly popular among the citizens of Russia. And there's a lot of debate on how accurate some of those metrics of measuring and how much of it is because of, I don't want to say brainwashing, propaganda that is infused with the state. But overall, Putin is a popular leader. He is a fairly charismatic person, and that gives his government more legitimacy. If you take Putin out of Russia and when he dies or retires, you're going to see a more unstable, a less legitimate Russia as people try and fill that hole of a charismatic leader, which is often the issue with basing your authority off of a charismatic leader. Once they're gone, it's harder to not survive, but thrive, to have that legitimacy. Because charismatic leaders, they retire and they die. No one is around forever. And that leads to a weakening of government legitimacy. And then there's also the legal rational, rational legal one. And this is most prominent in democracies. So the United Kingdom, Nigeria, and Mexico. And this comes from following society's legal rules and laws. If I'm a citizen of a democracy, I'm voting, I'm seeing the democratic process in action, I'm seeing governments follow the democratic process, I'm going to be likely to support the government. I'm feeling as if I'm being accurately represented and that the government is being fair in its enforcement of the laws. And so how is legitimacy challenged? And then there's a lot of different ways, and I'm going to get into each country here because I think this is fairly important to understand how the legitimacy of different countries is being challenged. So for Russia, a good example of this is mass protests against the government in 2011 because a lot of people believed, and there was good evidence that there was some levels of fraud in the 2011 election. And this led to the arrest of a lot of opposition leaders. And this challenged the government's legitimacy. Because the arrests of your opposition leaders, mass amounts of protests, it never really looks good for a government when that is a thing that is happening, especially when there's heavy crackdowns on it too. It can create like an aura of fear and tyranny within the country. Then for the UK, we can talk about Brexit is a good example of this, and I'll talk more about the European Union. We're going to get there today, actually, because we're combining parts of Unit 5. We'll talk a little bit about Brexit, and that has caused some instability. And then Iran, there's lots of different human rights abuses in Iran. If you're someone that isn't very religiously fundamental, if you're a Sunni Muslim, sort of a Shia Muslim, you're likely to face discrimination and some level of oppression from the government. And we see this a lot in Iran. For example, if you are a woman that doesn't want to wear the hijab, you are able to be prosecuted for that. It's required there. And we see protests in spark to that kind of religiously fundamental viewpoint. We see a lot of protests, which also decreases political legitimacy. And then for Mexico, there's lots of organized crime. And this is a good thing to tie back to like the federal versus unitary thing. Mexico is a federal state. Each individual state, some of the poorer ones, they aren't able to deal with their crime. And they amass crime or drug cartels. And this can be a problem of a federal system where local governments and local regional governments aren't able to combat the issues that face them because they don't have the resources that a unitary government would. And then in Nigeria, there's levels of corruption and there's some voter fraud and intimidation that goes on as well. And this is the challenges, but it can also be sustained, in particular by public trust and effective governance. If I am a citizen and I trust my government, I'm not going to be out there protesting. I'm not going to be out there trying to cause a revolution or a coup d'etat, which I think Johnny is going to talk about on, I think that's the next slide.
Yes.
Yeah. I'm not going to be challenging my government because I trust them because they have done effective governance. They're not infringing on my liberties and rights. They aren't failing in their duties, such as healthcare or similar things, or the economy, things like that. And each country has specific ways that they get their legitimacy and stability. For Russia, they use nationalism and, like I said before, the charisma of their leader. The Russian people, the Russian government uses the idea of Russian nationalism, so kind of encouraging the Russian race, if that makes sense. Kind of, I'm blanking on how to describe it, but basically supporting the unity of the Russian people under a government to support their regime. The United Kingdom has tradition and stability. I'm not going to get super into there. With China, it's very, very important to think of economic growth. China has had massive economic growth. That's probably one of the most well-known things about China. And when you are constantly having your standard of living improving, especially if you're a wealthy elite that has the ability to challenge the government, you're not going to think about rebelling. If your profits are going up or if your bank account is growing, you don't want to mess with that. But the issue with that is that recessions are bound to happen. And when a recession happens and you have based your legitimacy on economic growth, that can cause instability, large amounts of instability as people are losing their wealth. And then for Iran, a big part of it is religion. They use religion to justify their legitimacy. They use that to gain their stability. 90% of the country is Shia Muslim, and as such, they can use the religiously fundamental regime can use religion as a tool to keep their legitimacy and stability going. Mexico has a constitution, which kind of grounds them in stability. And same thing with Nigeria. And then Nigeria also has their decolonization and independence. The people of Nigeria have gone through the process of decolonization and gaining independence together. Nigeria was really formed as a country in the wake of the United Kingdom leaving. And that has kind of gained some national unity and legitimacy to the government because they have all been shaped and formed by that event. I'll let Johnny take the next slide.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about mechanisms of power change. So a lot of these, almost all of the AP6 governments, they've had at some time in their history a type of power change. So the first one we're going to talk about is revolution. This is a forcible overthrow of a government where the old social power is replaced with a new system of government. We do have the Chinese Communist Revolution in 1949, but we also have other revolutions, like some of you may have heard the Mexican Revolution, where that was the overthrow of the dictatorship of Porfirio Diaz, which that was resulting in very significant political, social, and even land reforms. Then there was the Islamic Revolution, where that was the overthrow of the Shah regime and the establishment of the Islamic Republican under the Khomeini, which transformed kind of the whole political structure for the rest of the years. And then we had the Russian Revolution, which led to the collapse of the autocracy, which was now by the Bolshevik seizure of power, and ultimately that established the Soviet Union. So just think, when you're thinking of the revolution, this is just responses to grievances such as political repression, economic inequality, and social justice. And they're driven by protest, resistant movements, and they're a radical overthrow of the existing political structure. Next, we have reform. So what these are is institutional changes from within. So these are not overthrown, again, like making a new type of government, but it's within the government, something different. This usually is to address corruption and move towards a more democratic state. So we have the post-Soviet Russia, which is Yeltsin. We also have China, which was the economic reforms initiated by Xiaoping in the late 1970s, which was led to the adoption of market-oriented policies and really opening up China's economy. So a lot of it, what you'll hear in Comp Gov is China's economic structure and how that's the main part of legitimizing the government, like I talked about in the last slide. So in 1970, with the reform made by Xiaoping, this was allowed for that. And then also in the UK, the process of devolution, this resulted in the transfer of significant political powers and also the central government to regional administration. So Brexit, like Zach talked about on the last slide. And then Nigeria, there was a lot of attempts at political and institutional reforms to address issues like corruption, electoral fraud. And now you can see Nigeria is one of those countries that's moving towards a more democratic state, from looking at previous years where there was a lot of corruption and, a lot of influences on other factors. Then finally, a coup d'etat. This is a illegal seizure or overt attempt to unseat leadership. And instigators are usually government or military, and this is different from a revolution. So what this is usually sudden and it's illegal. It's a seizure of power by a small group, typically within the military, against that government. And this results in the suspension of constitutional order and the establishment of authoritarian rule. These are usually motivated by a desire to control or influence state policies and address perceived threats to national security, resolve political crises, which they're executed through force or coercion, which was what we were talking about in the previous slide. So some common coup d'etat is one, the biggest one, or not the biggest one, but Nigeria. Nigeria has experienced multiple military coups. Remember, a lot of these are military officials who are taking over since gaining their independence in 1960. These result in periods of military rule interspersed with brief experiments with even civilian democracy. Then Russia, there was an attempted coup against Soviet leader Mikhail Gorbachev in 1991 by hardline communists and military officials. And this accelerated the collapse of the Soviet Union and really paved the way for establishment of independent states in Eastern Europe. And then lastly, there was the 1953 Iranian coup d'etat, and this was orchestrated by the CIA and led to overthrow of Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, and it was democratically elected government, and it reinstated the rule of the Shah Mohammad Reza. So some of these coup d'etat, they don't agree with the current government or military structure, so they lead to these illegal overthrows of the government. You can go to the next slide.
Before Zach jumps in, I'm just gonna make a poll visible. So the poll is, which one of these concepts would you want more review on? So these are a few concepts that we kind of touched on today, but we just wanted to know like which ones you guys have more questions about and which one we should go more in depth in explaining. So we'll explain the most voted one after they finish their part. So yeah, pick the poll.
All right. So I think that's me. We're going to be going over strategies for stability, and I talked a lot about this already because the strategies for governments getting stability, or regimes would probably be the better term. The strategies for regimes gaining legitimacy and stability are very, very similar. So this will be quick. I know I've talked a lot for my other two slides, so you can look forward to that. So governments and regimes are able to gain their stability through the use of checks, balances, and separation of powers, because that means that a society is more democratic. If there's a separation of powers and there's checks and balances, no one branch or institution of power is going to gain so much power that it becomes tyrannical. And that can lead to stability, as if I, as citizen, am having public trust. I'm trusting the institutions because I know they aren't going to get too powerful, and I'm more willing to cooperate. I'm not as likely to resist and protest and get in the way of some of the government's goals, because I know that those government goals are aligning with my goals for the most part, or the goals of my people. Then civil society is a good example, another strategy for stability, and we're going to get into civil society. I forget what unit that is. Does anybody remember what unit we talked more about civil society?
I will check for you now.
Four.
So that will be night
I was
4.
about to
We'll
say
be talking about civil.
Yeah, 3 or 4.
So night 4 we'll be talking more about civil society. So here's my mandatory advertisement to come back. We'll be elaborating on this further. But the basic gist of what you need to know is that if there is media freedom and civic participation, there's going to be more stability, because I am trusting my government. I'm participating in my government. I know that the media is free and unbiased and fair, and as such, I'm going to be participating, and there's going to be a strong civil society that provides support to the government, because the government is accountable to the people. And then lastly, the economy. Economic stability leads to political stability. When we're thinking about economic stability and how it relates to political stability, think China. Really, really, really think China. Because China has had massive amounts of economic growth, and this has provided the regime there large amounts of political stability. If the economy is good, the people are happy. They're not. If the economy is good, the people are happy. If I'm eating well, I'm getting higher and higher wages. I'm not going to be getting in the way of the government. I'm not going to be protesting or rioting or planning a revolution or a coup d'etat. I'm going to be focused on the economy. So, okay, Sean was talking in the chat. I thought I had a question. Sorry about that. And like Nishika said, economic stability also helps government maintain and keep their power. And it also helps governments lose their power. In the United Kingdom, this is a good example of this. The United Kingdom is going through a terrible time economically right now. The current government is the Conservative Party, and they are polling disastrously low.
They're going to get wrecked. They're going to get so destroyed. It's going to be so bad.
And we can see this in a lot of other countries too. Generally, right now, because inflation has been so high the last few years in response to the COVID epidemic, there's a lot of governments are losing their re-elections. And a good example of this is the United Kingdom. They're polling, the current government, the Conservative Party led by Rishi Sunak, is polling very, 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 very low. Yeah, that's all I have for this slide.
All right. So now I believe our next slide are discussion questions where we will my co-student hosts will talk about them, and we really encourage you guys to talk in the chat, and hopefully some of these discussion questions can spur some questions or like some questions from you guys. So I guess each of us, I don't know how we want to structure this, but we have 1, 2, 3, 4, we have 5 different questions, and I guess each of us can we can just talk about them and bring in our AP6 into them. So anyone,
if anyone wants to, if the 3 other hosts want to come on down,
come on the main stage.
I will come on.
So let's start with the first question. How do qualitative and it just became small. Okay, how do qualitative and quantitative research methods in political science differ?
I would love to do this one because actually David, this is what I covered 2.5 hours ago. Okay, so as mentioned before, qualitative and quantitative methods are both the essence of comparative politics and political science. So quantitative methods are the ones that are objective and they're done with numbers. So they're the numbers that are used to compare countries, such as I mentioned before, the Gini index, human development indexes, the gross domestic product of countries, the gross domestic product per capita. Those are the actual the actual numbers that matter and the ones we can use to compare different countries or 6-based countries. Like for example, I can tell you that the UK will have a higher GDP per capita than any of our 6 countries, than any of the other 5 countries. That's just a method of comparison. Rather, we also have their qualitative methods, which are a lot more subjective because there is no way of quantifying them as done with qualitative methods. Qualitative methods are subjective to they help us with comparison, like things such as religion or like happiness, or like surveys can be really useful in comparing countries, but they have no true metric. And quantitative data helps us create empirical data that can help us form conclusions and hypotheses as political scientists.
Okay, yay! Does anyone want to do the second one? Oh, sorry.
I'll take federal and unitary. Since I went over that, and I talked pretty at length about this one, and so I'm gonna get into something that I didn't really get a good chance to fully go into, because I've talked a lot about this, and this is really recent too. Federal systems tend to be more democratic, and unitary systems tend to be more authoritarian. This is not always the case. However, in federal systems, authoritarian governments try to seize power from the regional governments. We got a chat. Sorry, I want to get to the chat really quick before I'll get back to my thing. Emily, that is absolutely right. Power is shared between the regional and central government. And then unitary system, all power is derived from the central government. Completely right. Great job. And then so for a federal system, there tends to be authoritarian governments in a federal system are trying to take power away from the federal government normally. In Russia, Vladimir Putin has taken reforms to take away powers from the regional governments, so that way the central government, his government, can have more power. And then in unitary systems, such as the United Kingdom is giving more power to the federal, to the regional governments. Even though all power is derived from the national level, the United Kingdom is still giving this power away because that's the more democratic option. And then we have a great answer covering the general basics of it in the chat too, so I won't get into it. Seems we're pretty good on understanding that. But yeah.
Okay, I can take the next question because that's kind of what I talked about. So, compare the mechanisms through which regimes maintain their legitimacy. So, regimes, they maintain their legitimacy through various mechanisms, and it really differs based on the type of regime. Like, I'll review democratic and authoritarian and semi-democratic, but also, their cultural norms, where they are, what religions. So, first of all, democratic regimes, a lot of times they have three different elections. Elections is extremely important. They offer maintain legitimacy through free, fair, and regular elections, which really allows citizens to be represented and hold them accountable for their actions, because Democrats just think, being able to actually have their citizens represented in the government. Rule of law, adherence to rule of law, protection of civil liberties, and respect for human rights is very crucial for democratic legitimacy. And also legal institutions are put in place to ensure that laws are fair and transparent. And then civil society, strong civil society institutions like no censorship for media, allowing media in the first place, NGOs, advocacy groups, which we'll talk more actually in the next slides. They play a very critical role in having that legitimacy for democratic regimes. So authoritarian regimes, they maintain legitimacy through distribution of economic benefits, public service, favors to key supporters such as elites, military leaders, or loyalist groups. So that's like patronage. And then propaganda and censorship. Authoritarian regimes, they control the flow of information through state-controlled media, censorship, propaganda, and they shape the public perceptions and suppressing the voices. So think the cyber wall in China. And then also one big one is nationalism and having that nationalist ideology, which is like appealing to the patriotism, the ideological principles of nationalism and communism to actually rally the support for the regime. And then also I'll touch a little bit on like semi-democratic or like hybrid regimes. Selective democratization. So hybrid regimes could maintain democratic institutions like elections, but also restrict political competition or undermine democratic norms. And then they could also manipulate institutions, like manipulate the electoral processes or constitutional amendments or legal frameworks. Just understanding like what the regime is and having that kind of what we talked in previous slide, what the actual type, democratic versus authoritarian, will really allow you to place which mechanisms go with which and really understanding the concept of legitimacy. But yeah, whoever wants to take the next question can go.
I can take the next one. So the next one is to analyze the impact of political institutions in a democracy versus in an authoritarian regime. So I think it's very important to keep in mind that political institutions are going to have a different role depending on what type of political regime that country is. In a sense, in a context of a democratic country, political institutions are usually at the same level in a sense that because of the checks and balances, the judiciary, the executive, the legislature, they're all kind of operating on the same level and checking on each other to make sure that they're equal in power. And the political institutions kind of determine that, and the people are the ones that legitimize that in a democratic regime. They legitimize the political institutions. Now, in terms of an authoritarian regime, the political institutions might not all have the same power because let's say there is a supreme leader who is above the law, who is the person that kind of operates and manages the political institution. That in that case, the person is going to be above that. And I think this is a good segue for us to touch on the poll. So I'm gonna the poll that we just had. We were
Do you want me to
asking you
make it
guys
public, Bella?
which.
Oh, okay, no, you had it.
Yeah, no, I was about to check if it's public, but it is public. I think it's good for us to talk about totalitarianism, since we're talking about the dynamics between political institutions and authoritarian regimes. So, in a totalitarian regime, which was the one that you guys most voted for, it is a regime in which the government controls everything in people's lives. So it's an all encompassing power in which they determine their religion, what they're going to learn in school, and how they can participate in the political landscape. So I think when you're talking about totalitarianism, think about the word total. It's an all encompassing power that is given to the government. And I think that explains part of that. And we can touch on populism and communism as well, because that was a pretty tight vote. But whoever wants to take on the next question.
Yeah, everyone's gone. I can take over the last question. All right, so how do changes in power and authority shape political landscape? So, kind of similar, this ties back into democracy versus authoritarian a little bit. So we can see that when governments consolidate more power and more authority, they tend to be more authoritarian. If you take a look on the meme to the side, when a government takes on some emergency power, after all, why not? Why shouldn't I keep it? We can see that if you remember from a few slides ago, we talked about I think it was the slide to authoritarianism, something along those lines. Basically, when a government starts to take power and starts to slowly take more, it's kind of a downward spiral. If there aren't those checks or democratic procedures in place to stop people from doing that. So when we see more power and authority consolidated, we can see like the political landscape kind of shifts to a more authoritarian or I guess less democratic regime, and vice versa. We can also see that um, um, I guess changes in power and authority also mean like changes in who has the power. So when the power is, for example, an oligarchy or more like totalitarian in a few people, we can see again the political landscape becomes a little bit more oppressive, less freedoms, less public media, and all of these authoritarian things. But when the changes in power go to more of the people and the authority in the government represents the wishes and I guess the voice of the people, like in a democracy, we can see the political landscape shifts a little bit. Obviously, clearly more democratic, more transparent, and for example, that leads to fair and free elections, and that kind of snowballs the ladder to democracy. If you remember that, so that's all I have.
I guess I wanted to add to it, and I'll also add to the populism section of the poll we just did. So basically, power and authority is the central question of political science. And I kind of hate and love this question at the same time because it's so broad. And it would make a wonderful argumentative essay question for the FRQs, at least to like the essence of the question. But really, power and authority, like changes the dynamic of political landscape so much in the sense of new leaders, in the sense of new Congress people, new like state or I'm blanking on like the different subdivisions, but like what the people who make decisions can really change like our lives and how that's enacted on how these things are enacted upon us. So I'm gonna use that as a segue to populism in the sense that leaders, at least in democratic regimes, use the power of the people or an us versus them mentality to gain power. And I think a really potent example of this was Andres Manuel Lopez Obrador. I believe he was elected in 2018. Um, I think 2018 is right. Where he was elected to his 6-year term. where his campaign was largely based on going against the government of Peña Nieto and the wrongs that they did. So he helped rally a lot of the Mexican people against the status quo that was standing for the past 6 years. And this is seen throughout, throughout politics as a whole. I'm gonna again commit the horrible sin of mentioning other countries, but countries such as Brazil, who elected Jair Bolsonaro, which is on the other side of the political spectrum than AMLO, under the same rhetoric of populism, or even the United States, where Donald Trump helped propel a populism agenda to get himself into power. And I think that fits into power and authority so much because it really does completely change our political landscapes and the way we see countries today. So, yeah, that's all I have.
I think we can go to the next slide. If you guys have, I'm just going to check if you guys have any other questions. Otherwise, Zach, you can take it away with Supernational.
All right.
So now we're going to Unit 5.
Yeah, this is Unit 5 content. Hey, Sean, welcome to the main stage.
I tried going to the main stage when everybody else went, and it wouldn't let me. So, I
think it's because we can only have 5 people in the wing. I think that might be it.
Oh, guys, I just wanted to add. Oh, sorry. I think it was Emily and Anika, or Annika. Sorry if I mispronounced your name. You correct me. But even though your questions were answered on the stream, I gave you like full written responses. If you go on the answer tab and you look at comments, you guys can copy those responses onto your notes if you guys need any of that elaboration, or really everybody else on the stream. Like that, those are written responses to the questions you all asked today.
Also, Sean, can you it's like an animation thing. Can you just press it? Okay, thank you. Oh, too far. Wrong one. You went ahead a slide. There we go. we're getting through it here, folks. We're almost at the end. All right, so this is Unit 5 stuff. So if it feels really different to what we've been talking about, that's why. So we're going to be talking about supranational and then later international organizations. So what is a supranational organization? It's basically it's international or regional institutions with authority above the individual member states, allowing them to make decisions that bind those states. So what does that mean? Let's break that down. Basically, it's organizations and agreements formed with different countries that are voluntarily giving up some of their power in order to get a service. So for Economic Community of West African States, which Nigeria is a member of, it was created to promote economic integration and growth among West African states. The countries that join this organization are losing some of the control over their own economy. They're giving up that sovereignty in order to gain economic prosperity and integration and free trade and other things like that. So that way their economies can grow, which in turn gets them legitimacy and stability. So you can usually think of a supranational organization as giving up sovereignty in order to gain some political legitimacy and stability back. That's kind of a good way to think of the trade-off of joining a supranational organization. And we see this through the WTO, the World Trade Organization too, which it's kind of similar to the Economic Community of West African States, ECOWAS. It's an organization that promotes international trade and facilitates it through the adoption of rules. It's establishing rules. And since this country is joining the WTO, they're giving up some of their control over trade in exchange to have easier trade with other countries, and which gives them in turn a more prosperous economy, and then as such, more political legitimacy and stability. And then the European Union. I promised I'd talk about Brexit, so here we are. The European Union is one of the oldest and largest supranational organizations, which was created to promote the union and economic growth between nation states. The European Union started out as an organization to trade steel and coal. That's how it started. And it expanded its power, and the countries, as it expanded its borders and countries began to give up more and more of their sovereignty in order to form more of a European government. They have gained much more unity, and that has given them legitimacy and stability. And we can see that when a country leaves a supranational organization, they can often lose a lot of that political legitimacy and stability too. The United Kingdom is a very, very good example of this. The United Kingdom left the European Union, and over a period of I think it was 3-4 years of negotiations that were very, very chaotic and uncertain, to define how things work. And they also took some hits in their economy while doing that because of the new terms, which has caused their economy to worsen. And as such, as we talked about earlier, the political party in power to also weaken. And this is a good example of how leaving a supranational organization can affect political legitimacy and stability. Although the United Kingdom has gained some of its sovereignty back, they have lost that legitimacy and stability in exchange. And then the other thing to think about is why do countries leave supranational organizations? And it's typically due to nationalism, which we haven't gotten super far into here. But if you are a believer that your state and your nation is superior, you're not wanting to give up, your sovereignty and your powers to people from other countries. That's not something that you're interested in. And we can see this within the United Kingdom, that they wanted to regain that sovereignty, and as such, they left. Yeah, I'll hand it back over to Andrani for international organizations.
Okay. Next slide, please. Okay, so I think the first thing I want to talk about is what's the difference between supranational organizations and international organizations. Really, it's that supranational organizations, they involve a higher degree of integration and authority over member states, while international organizations focus on voluntary cooperation and coordination among the states without that supranational authority. So like Zach just explained, the European Union and the African Union kind of think that as supranational organizations, while international organizations is more like the UN or the World Bank. But anyways, what these are their institutions composed of multiple countries that work together to address global issues and promote cooperation among member states. I think a big example when they do ask you if you have to do a comparison one on the AP exam, I would say the United Nations, because what this is that's an organization that serves to promote cooperation between countries and promote international security, human rights, and development. The World Bank, this organization provides loans to developing countries to help them to promote growth and development. And then finally, the International Monetary Fund. This works to promote financial stability and the conditions for nations to grow economically. So what these are they're entities formed by states to facilitate cooperation and coordination on issues of mutual interest. They usually do not have authority to make binding decisions on member states. Member states, they retain their sovereignty and autonomy in international organizations, and they voluntarily cooperate and coordinate with other states, but are not required to adopt common policies or law. For example, if a issue was passed in the United Nations, that does not need to be taken in by the member state in comparison to other organizations that occur. Does anyone have any questions, first of all? Because I think sometimes, I know I usually get confused with supranational and international organizations. Zach, can you do one thing and do help me? Can we maybe it will be beneficial if we do it for the UN, maybe like what AP6 are, because I'm totally blanking on like which AP6 are involved with the UN. I know that's a very basic question.
Sure. Sure. And I'll go, I wanted to jump in on the international and supranational, the main difference between the two of them. What ultimately makes it different is that the supranational organization can make binding decisions. They have the ability, and it's kind of more democratic in a lot of that time too. You're giving up a lot of your sovereignty to join a supranational organization, but when you join an international organization, it's more of a cooperation thing. That's a lot of Asians that I just said there.
Exactly.
And I don't know
yeah, and I'll say Like for international organization, for example, member states, they negotiate agreements and resolution and decisions, and they're made by consensus building or majority vote, but they are not binding unless states adhere to them. And then decision making in supranational organizations are often made through a combination of intergovernment negotiations and regulations, and some decisions may require unanimous agreement among member states, while others can be majority vote. So yeah, I think that binding decision was a very good example.
And then for the United Nations thing, you don't. I don't think you. From what I remember, you don't need to get super in depth with the knowing the United Nations. All 6 countries that we cover are members of the United Nations. Being a member of the United Nations is typically how we define if a country is a country, although it gets complicated very quickly. And just talk about the United Nations Security Council. There's 5 permanent members on the Security Council. 3 of them we cover in this course: the United Kingdom, Russia, and China. All sit as permanent members on the United Nations Security Council, which means that they have greater say in the decision-making of the United Nations. And so they are very directly involved. The other 2 countries are France and the United States. So big countries that control a lot in world politics. So yeah. That's just a good example of showing how those 3 countries in particular have a lot of power in international organizations.
Okay. If anyone doesn't have any other questions on that, I believe our next slide, or not our next slide. Yeah, our next slide is our next quiz. So.
Is that the quiz we're doing, or did we switch it?
Yeah, I was.
Yeah. So it's gonna be the one that
I think it
says
should be the same
review.
quiz. If I'm not mistaken, it should be the same, though I'm not 100% sure. Okay, the link that Bella had sent me was the one I labeled on our call to actions as full-blown quiz. So I think that one's it.
All right, so let me put that up there because I don't have.
All right, so everybody participating? Oh, okay. Somebody did it for me. It's full-blown quiz.
It says I'm waiting for the host to start the quiz.
I'll send the host link. I know Bella sent it before.
Okay. Just email it to me. Can you do that or no? Or are you gonna put it in the chat?
I was
Either way.
going to, yeah. I'll send it to you now.
Okay.
Bella, while we're waiting, did you want to touch really quick on communism? Because I know we had some people that wanted us to review that.
Yeah, of course. Let me go back to the main stage. Okay. So the way that the AP comparative exam will require you to understand communism is not really from an economic lens, because the concept of communism from Marx comes from everyone owns the means of production. When in capitalism, we have the owners of the means of production and the people who are working. In communism, everyone is considered the same and should have the same level of power that way. So when you're thinking about communism within the AP Comp context, you're thinking about China and the way that they kind of incorporated the communist philosophy into their government system. Now, China has not fully incorporated Marx's philosophy because it has changed many things. For example, the Communist Party in China is the only party that can run for elections, though there is some like leeway for people who want to push for different agendas, but that's not something that China allows very much. So the way that their communism works is by focusing on social welfare, so providing stuff to their citizens, making sure that everyone is kind of equal. But within that context, the Communist Party and the political leaders are kind of above the people. So that's why it's not necessarily the fundamental Marxist communist ideology, but they highly focus on providing to people, command economy, which is something that we'll touch on later when we talk about economy, and maybe state authority over people in order to maintain control. So those are things to keep in mind when you're thinking about communism within the context of China. Hopefully that answers you guys' kind of like pending questions about this topic. Now, were we able to get the quiz going or no? Awesome.
Looks like it. 16 participants.
How do we have 16
let's start
people?
this quiz.
Okay, Zach,
Is that too loud again?
Do we want to yeah, a little louder. Okay, I like
Thank
that.
you,
Okay,
Sean.
so how might civil liberties be affected when a democracy transitions to an authoritarian regime? A, civil liberties remain largely unchanged as they are constitutionally protected. B, civil liberties fluctuate depending on public opinion rather than government policy. C, civil liberties are prioritized and expanded. Or D, civil liberties are likely to be restricted or eliminated. Okay, so wait for 9 more people.
I think cut it off when we get to 10, because I think those 8 people aren't actually here. We might have done it during the previews, and then they're showing up. Okay, let's say it says 11, so we'll be going with like 11 as our golden number, I think.
Okay, good job, everyone.
100% right.
Yeah,
this one is. Oh, you want to take it?
Or no, go ahead. You were talking. Yeah. Go ahead.
Okay, so this one is fairly straightforward, which we can see as everyone got it right. When a democracy transitions to an authoritarian regime through democratic backsliding, civil liberties are likely to be restricted or eliminated. And again, we talked about this in the last quiz. A, C, and B are all fairly similar. A and B especially, or both, it doesn't really change. And then C is they get expanded. And when we talk about to the latter democratization, C would be correct. Civil liberties are prioritized and expand. But however, when we're doing democratic backsliding or going towards authoritarian regime, you are losing your civil liberties and your rights, like the right to vote, right to self-expression, right to free press, etc. And we have lost the quiz.
Oh no.
Oh no, that's my fault.
Sorry about that.
All right, hold on a second. I'm gonna put us back in. To share my screen. Boom, boom, boom.
All right. And next question. And we're back to the loud music. Awesome. Okay. I'll read this one. Why might a population alternatively support an authoritarian government over a democratically elected government? A, people prefer authoritarian rules because democratic governments fail to allow any forms of public participation. B, individuals choosing authoritarianism typically negate the idea of individual rights and political freedom in favor of mass surveillance and control. C, populations may support authoritarianism for promising stability and economic growth. And D, populations opt for authoritarian systems due to solely dissatisfactions with political polemics and free elections. A lot of words. We'll see if we can get the 10th person to answer. 11. All right. That should be everybody. Awesome. We got this one mostly correct. The correct answer was C. Populations may support authoritarianism for promising stability and economic growth. B is correct in that it characterizes what democracies do and what authoritarian regimes do. So democratic regimes do have individual rights and political freedoms, and authoritarian regimes do have mass surveillance and control a lot of the time. However, people don't accept the mass surveillance and control just for the sake of it. They don't do it like, oh, I'm going to wake up one day and I'm going to support a government taking away my individual liberties. They're trading their liberties for something else. An example of this is China, right? In China, we see that the people aren't protesting the government. The government has stability because there is economic growth. Because the government has a heavy hand in the economy, they have been able to have large amounts of economic growth, and as such, they are willing to accept the authoritarianism that comes with it. It's not that they're choosing the authoritarianism for the sake of authoritarianism. They are choosing the authoritarianism because they get something out of it in return. Does that make sense? Anybody have any questions on that? Or anything they want to add? All right. Seems like we're good to go to the next question. Now let Johnny take this one.
All right. So, which forms of engagement demonstrate civil society playing a role in promoting democratic principles within an authoritarian state? A. Grassroots activism advocating for human rights reform. B. Businesses following governmental regulations. C. Citizens attending mandatory patriotic rallies. D. State organized community service activities. So enjoy the music and answer the question.
It's on as low as I
That should be just about everybody. All right.
All right. So we got, oh my God, you guys are doing great. So yeah, grassroots active at like this is also pretty straightforward. I think one example you can use is if there was activism in a country like China, oftentimes you could see many of those citizens, they're suppressed because of the censorship. So when just illustrating civil society, think places that allow for people to get involved with their own government, whether that be advocacy, whether that be, really influencing laws. So yeah, I mean, Zach, do you have anything to add on?
I just wanted to say, I think we did this in one of the preview nights, and I think it was split like 60-40 or something like that. So I just wanted to say great job to everybody here. Yeah.
Hey guys, wait, oh no. Just wanted to add that there is a survey now.
Sean, can you turn off the music for a second?
Okay, so there's a survey up now and a call to action button that basically just asks about how we did, some ways that we can improve, and just asks you to rate us. So if you guys have the time for that, we'd also love for you to do that also, but don't disregard the quiz. All right. We could continue, please.
Back to the quiz. With the music, preferably. Oh, there we go. All right. How might an authoritarian regime use managed elections differently than democratic regimes use competitive elections? A, to ensure maximum participation by offering free choice among candidates with differing ideologies. B, to facilitate an open competition for leadership positions among various political parties. C, to distribute resources equitably based on election outcomes reflecting popular will. Or D, to give the appearance of legitimacy without risking loss of power. I think that's everybody. All right, 100% again. We're doing great. Very nice. A, B, and C are all things that we would see in a democratic regime, and we're being asked about an authoritarian regime. And again, like we've talked about before, A, B, and C are all fairly similar. So even if I didn't know which characteristics were there for an authoritarian or a democratic regime, which I hope we would after this night, but even if I didn't know all of that, I would still be able to do process of elimination to how similar A, B, and C are to figure out that it's D. All right.
Okay, so how can membership in supranational trade organizations influence a country's tariff policies? A, reforming healthcare systems as an indirect approach not tied to trade regulations directly. B, raising educational standards nationally due to increased competition among member states. C, adopting lower tariffs on goods from fellow member states according to agreed upon rules. Or D, strengthening domestic patent laws unrelatedly affecting non-member country products. Yeah, and then just another thing, if you guys have any questions like on this or literally anything, text it in the Q&A. We have 10 minutes, so we definitely want to be able to help you guys as much as we can.
Where'd the music go?
Okay, so good job.
Wow.
Okay, good job. So you guys got all of them right. So yeah, so adopting lower tariffs on goods from fellow member states according to the rules, it could, being in the European Union or the African Union, it could be an incentive to join, but also that's one of the main purposes that Zach talked about earlier in terms of supranational trade organizations. I think we can go to the next one though.
Oh, there we go. Now I can't hear a thing, but all right. Which of the following best represents a source of legitimacy in many modern states? A, military coups, B, divine right of kings, C, inherited wealth, or D, popular elections. And I'll give you a hint here. When we think about modern, we're thinking a lot about developed countries more. And developed countries tend to follow a certain system of governments more often, a certain regime. And which one would that one be? All right, 100%. Modern tends to be more developed, and more developed tends to be more democratic, and democracy requires popular elections. Fairly straightforward, so I won't get into this one. We can go on to the next question.
All right. So, which scenario indicates a challenge to political legitimacy regarding individual rights? A, legitimate electoral systems prohibit candidates from certain parties. B, social movements demand greater protection under existing human rights laws. C, executive decrees undermine collective bargaining agreements. Or D, the judiciary overturns legislation limiting speech on its unconstitutional grounds.
Not as low as possible.
Where's the World Cup music?
Wait, I thought you stopped because it was too loud.
Oh no, I finished the
All right, we got 10 people. Should be good to reveal the answer.
Okay, good job. You guys are on a roll. Wow, everyone's getting them right. So yeah, we won't go too much into it, but yeah, C. Next one.
Are we looking at the same screen right now?
It's D.
Oh, okay. No, actually, we should talk about this one. I saw, okay, it's 20%, 20%, 20%. Okay, so everyone was kind of divided. So again, which is a scenario indicates a challenge to political legitimacy regarding individual rights? D, the judiciary overturns legislation limiting speech based on its unconstitutionality. Zach, provide your input on this because I have to read the other ones.
This one is strange. I'll say that.
I know.
If someone else, there's a lot of, I can see the argument for a lot of the other ones too. However, we're more looking at a challenge to political legitimacy. So this seems more like we're having a regression. Nishka you want to jump in? Go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to jump in. Like, I think like the reason, because I feel like this is definitely one of the trickier questions. A reason I thought that D would have been the correct answer is because like when you read the questions, like what scenario indicates a challenge to political legitimacy regarding individual rights? So that key like individual rights is pretty important because when you look at all the other answer choices, like A is about like parties, B is about kind of human rights as a whole. C is collective bargaining, but D is the only one that's talking about like speech, which is like an individual freedom. So if you think of freedoms, like I know we're not supposed to refer to the United States, but I guess like the easiest way is like press, petition, religion.
The cardinal sin.
Sorry, but you know what I mean. When we talk about like B, I can understand why people chose that one because like human rights can be individual, but I think D was the better option because just by looking at like the individual, because like this is where reading the question comes into play, and like because some of these other answer choices may have been right about legitimacy, but not about the individual right part. So D is like the judiciary overturning legislature limiting speech based on it's unconstitutional is the only one that really directly impacts a singular person's right. Everything else is more collective or party based. So yeah, that's a good way to go.
And although B can be an individual rights, if we're interpreting it in that way, which you very well, I definitely see how you could. It is stating that there is under already existing human rights laws, which is an important distinction. If those human rights laws are already existing and they're demanding their extension and protection, there's already a certain political legitimacy in place given to the government because of the human rights laws that are already existing. But yeah, this was a tricky one. You really have to get into the details and analyze the question more. I can't remember having a question that was this confusing on the actual exam. So if you got this one right, give yourself a pat on the back. You should be feeling pretty good. And if you got it wrong, I wouldn't worry too much about it. It's a tricky question.
Zach, you want to read that one?
Sure. How would a stable legal system most likely affect political legitimacy? And I won't read the answers since they're all pretty short and to the point. I'll just let everyone enjoy the music. And this will also be our last question for the night. Yeah, feel free to reveal the answer. And yeah, this one was definitely much easier than the previous one, and I won't get into it. So we can end the screen share now. You can all head.
Good job, guys. Overall, really great performance. I think all our hosts can come back.
Someone unpin Sean. He looks too happy. There we go.
Oh, why? Okay. All right. The anger.
Hey guys, just wanted FYI, I opened a poll, our last poll of the night, basically asking how you're feeling for our exam on May 7th, I believe. I know it's on Wednesday. I think it's on May 7th. Just answer. We want to know your opinion, how you're feeling about everything.
If it's on a Wednesday.
Oh, my bad.
Sorry, I didn't mean to.
Oopsies. And we totally get that it's a very daunting experience. Waiting for an AP exam, but trust me, if you guys are here, you guys are way ahead of the curve. You guys are gonna do great, and you guys are gonna ace that exam. And if you keep on staying for the rest of the nights, we'd be more than happy to host you and to answer your questions. We're really
terrified. Tell us why. Why are you terrified? What are
you terrified about? Okay, write in the chat why you're terrified, so we can help you.
I do want to say I know AP exams can be scary. But the fact that you guys are putting in this time right before the exam, it's going to do wonders. And it's also very telling that you care a lot about this exam, which puts you a lot ahead of most of the competition, if I'm being honest. You guys are putting the time in, you're putting the hours in. The other thing I'll say really, really quick, because I can tell Sean wants to jump in.
Wait till time.
The other thing I'll say, actually I have two more things to say really, really quick. Number one, AP Comp Gov is on a curve, right? So if you're getting like 60%, 70% of the questions correct, don't feel bad. You only need 70% on the overall test to get a 5. So, and there's score calculators out there. We have one on the Fiveable website. Feel free to use that. And that can definitely alleviate your concerns a little bit. It's curved a good bit more than US Gov because we cover more content. We cover more countries. And then number two, if you guys want to practice more, it's on the Fiveable website. There's like a huge bank of practice questions, and feel free to use that.
Okay, now just real quick, are some of you nervous, or what was the actual phrase? I can't see it. What
Class is my downfall.
Terrified because you're taking AP Lit first? Maybe because you're taking AP Lit first. That's not fair. You know, like that's a thing. I can see that. Okay, it's 10 o'clock. We're gonna do this again tomorrow from 7 to 10. How exciting that is!
We'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Bye.
All right, y'all.
Bye, everybody.
Bye. It was great being with you.